Hey guys, tonight we're headed deep into the echoing stone halls of a medieval convent, where, believe it or not, things are not nearly as holy as they seem. Behind those thick walls, behind the chants and the candle smoke, something much more human, much more intimate, is unfolding. It's the kind of thing the church would rather you never ever find out. But here we are, and yeah, you probably won't survive this without questioning at least 3 historical documentaries and your entire idea of what chaste actually means. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to beg in Latin. Now I'm curious, where are you tuning in from? Drop your city and what time it is there in the comments. I love seeing where you're all watching from across space and time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a small, ivy-covered cloister. The air smells of lavender, earth, and candle wax, and it's impossibly quiet, until it isn't. A bell tolls from a nearby chapel, and a line of hooded figures glides past you, silent as ghosts. You've just stepped into the 14th century, somewhere in northern Italy. Welcome to the convent! You're not here as a visitor. No, you're inside the skin of one of them now. A novice, young, just barely out of childhood, and already cloaked in black wool, expected to trade the world for a vow of silence, obedience, and, well, let's say, a suspicious amount of unsupervised time. The thing is, convents weren't always what the church painted them to be. They were sanctuaries, sure, but also prisons, escape hatches, power centres, and sometimes playgrounds. And you're already sensing that tension. The way one sister's eyes linger too long during the morning prayers. The way the abbess speaks to you in riddles, always watching. This place is humming with secrets, and not just the theological kind. You arrived last week, after being sent away by your family. You barely understand why. Something about your sister needing the family dowry more than you did. Something about how this life would be safe and pure. But here, in the chill of your narrow cell, lying on a straw mattress that smells like mildew, and centuries of anxiety, you feel anything but pure. You dream too much. You think too much. And you've already caught Sister Angela in the laundry room doing something that definitely did not involve laundry. The walls don't talk here, but they listen. You get the sense that every whispered conversation, every locked cabinet, and every odd glance is part of a larger web. At night you hear footsteps, soft ones, on the stone floors. You once thought they were prayers made visible. Now you're not so sure. The other night you swear you saw a flickering candle through the slit in the abbess's door, long after lights out. It were moving, rhythmically, hypnotically. Fact, in real history, medieval convents were often stuffed with noble-born girls who had no intention of ever becoming holy. Many were shoved into veils to protect family fortunes, keep daughters safe, or just plain out of the way. It wasn't about calling, it was about control. But guess what happens when you trap smart, educated, sometimes rebellious women behind stone walls with each other for life? Yeah, let's talk about a lesser-known fact here. Certain convents kept pet rabbits, harmless, right? Except, medieval art often used rabbits as symbols of lust. Which makes those cosy little bunnies hopping around nuns' quarters feel a little more loaded than your average Beatrix Potter tale. Were they just pets? Or were they symbols that gave the sisters a way to laugh quietly at the very rules they were forced to live under? And here's the kicker. Scholars still can't fully agree on just how common the central underworld of convent life was. Was it the norm, just barely hidden? Or were these the scandalous exceptions, exaggerated by male chroniclers with the dirty minds and too much ink? The evidence we have, confession records, letters, even trial documents, suggest both possibilities. Which means tonight you're balancing between reality and rumour. But isn't that where all the good stories live? Back to your story now. Your second week in the convent and you've already learnt the routines. Matins before dawn, mass mid-morning, silent meals, afternoons of copying texts or embroidering altar cloths. But what really holds your attention are the private moments, the brush of a hand when passing a candle, the way Sister Clara lingers near your cell. She asked to see your rosary, and when you handed it to her, your fingers touched, just for a moment, but it sent a spark through your chest like nothing you've felt before. Was that sin? Was that the divine? You're not entirely sure anymore. There's something haunting about the convent gardens. Roses grow too well here, like they're feeding on secrets. In the evenings, you walk the perimeter and listen. Once you found a poem scratched faintly into the wall behind the statue of the Virgin. Something about longing and breath and fire. It didn't feel like a prayer, it felt like a confession. You're not alone in your confusion. The other girls whisper when they think no one hears. About dreams, about each other. About the priest who visits once a month and spends a little too long hearing Sister Lucia's confession. Tonight you're in the scriptorium, copying a psalm by candlelight, but your mind drifts. Across the table, Sister Clara watches you. You look up and meet her gaze. No one speaks, no one has to. The veil you wear isn't just cloth anymore. It's a mask, a shield, and maybe even a kind of armour. Because this place isn't just about holiness, it's about hiding. And underneath the habit, you can feel it. The hum of desire, the thrum of something no vow could ever silence. You don't get to choose to be a nun. Not really. At least not in your century. Maybe someday, hundreds of years from now, someone will say she had a calling. But tonight, back in the thick-walled convent, where even laughter sounds guilty, you know better. You remember the look on your father's face? More business than blessing. He didn't ask if you were ready to give your life to God. He asked how many ducats the dowry would save him. The answer was all of them. You were the second daughter. That already sealed your fate. First daughter's married. Second daughter's vanished into the cloisters. You weren't ugly, not by a long shot. That would have at least made things simpler. But you were clever. Too clever, maybe. A little too interested in maps and books. Too slow to smile at the right boys during festivals. And so the decision was made. Habit over husband. A permanent fast from the world. You didn't walk into this convent. Your life was marched here for you. Your mother cried when they shaved your head. She'd done it once herself years ago. You caught a glimpse of her under-veil scars when she kissed your forehead goodbye. Her tears weren't for your soul, they were for your youth, slipping away under the guise of sanctity. You were 12. It was called a spiritual marriage, the whole nun thing. You'd be the bride of Christ, they said. They gave you a ring and everything. It felt more like an arranged marriage to a man who never answered your letters. And yet, once the doors closed behind you and the world outside turned into a memory, the convent began to feel less like a tomb and more like a theatre. Everyone playing their part. The quiet one, the devout one, the cook, the madwoman, the flirt. You tried to be the scholar. You buried yourself in Latin hymns and studied the herbal books. You read about martyrs burned alive, saints pierced with arrows, virgins drowning themselves rather than marry. You underlined the parts where they said pure, but something in you flinched every time you saw the word. Most of the other girls weren't pure in any spiritual sense. Many were dumped here after messy love affairs or illegitimate pregnancies. Some came pregnant, hidden under wide gowns and looser rules. The church had its ways of covering scandal. Send the girl to the cloister. Let the baby disappear. Pretend the hymns worked better than shame ever could. The church liked to paint cloistered life as peaceful, but it was crowded, hormonal, and absolutely teeming with gossip. The corridors echoed with more than chant. They echoed with heat. Imagine 100 women of every age locked away together. No men, no exit, no expectations beyond obedience. That's a recipe, not for piety, but for mischief, or worse, intimacy. One night during vigil prayers, you noticed Sister Beatrice wasn't kneeling with the rest. Her cell door was ajar. You weren't supposed to look, but curiosity has always been your downfall. So you peeked, just a flicker, a candle, 2 shadows moving, the sound of breath, soft, close, rhythmic. You told yourself it could be anything, but you already knew what it was. Sister Beatrice wasn't punished. She led morning prayers the next day, face radiant. Voice strong, no one said a word, oh, sir, which told you everything. This place wasn't pure, it was polite, and when silence is mandatory, anything can flourish behind it. Now, for a historical truth that doesn't make it into most textbooks. Many noble families bribed abbesses to look the other way. They didn't want their daughters miserable, just contained. A happy nun was easier to manage than a rebellious one. So some convents became oddly liberal behind closed doors. Secret gardens, personalised cells, even private kitchens. Power here was a shifting thing. If you could read and write and flirt well with the bishop during his annual visit, you might end up in charge. Then there's this weird little side note. Some convents kept parrots, exotic birds brought from overseas by merchants and gifted to wealthy abbeys. They weren't just status symbols. People believed parrots repeated what they heard, which made them either perfect confessors or the worst possible snitches. Imagine one mimicking your voice moaning a name during midnight prayer. Imagine the terror. Imagine the thrill. Still, scholars argue over how far all this actually went. Were these exceptions just a few rogue convents? Or was the entire system quietly stewing in repressed passion? It's hard to say. Most of the records that might have confirmed things were either destroyed by the church or never written in the first place. History has gaps, and where there are gaps, there are guesses. You start to see the patterns. Sister Clara, always reaching for your hand in prayer. Sister Angela disappearing after dark, returning flushed and bright-eyed. Even the abbess, who holds your gaze too long during readings, voice low and syrupy, like honey spilled over old parchment. You wonder, are you the only one who notices, or the only one still pretending not to? This isn't what you expected. You thought the convent would crush your spirit, but instead, it's sharpening you. You're learning how to read faces, listen between words, hide your thoughts behind psalms. You've become fluent in double meanings. Every scripture is now a code, every prayer a smokescreen. You lie awake at night thinking of Sister Clara's lips, the way they curve around the word Amen. You dream of her fingers trailing across your palm during sewing hour. It's not a fantasy, not anymore. It's memory, from this morning and yesterday and the day before. And somehow you still feel devout. You still feel close to something sacred, because whatever's happening here, it feels honest. More honest than the lie you were forced to wear. One night, Sister Clara sneaks into your cell. She says nothing, just slides into your bed, curls against your back, her breath warm on your neck. No words, no need. You fall asleep like that. Heart pounding, body burning. The next morning, you both rise and pray like nothing happened. You are technically still a virgin. You are technically a nun. But already your life is 2 stories. One for the abbess, one for yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's the only way women like you have ever survived history at all. You start to notice how the convent breathes. Not just the rhythm of prayers and chores, but the deeper, subtler inhale and exhale beneath it all. The pulse that hides in corners and flickers in candlelight. It's not piety. It's possibility. A kind of quiet subterranean rebellion that winds its way through the convent's bones. And now that you've tasted it, you can't unsee it. At first glance, life inside these walls appears regulated, even mechanical. Bells dictate your every move, from morning matins to evening silence. Meals are taken in lines. Prayers are recited in unison, and speech is limited to what's necessary. But in between those rigid rules lies a kind of sensual freedom no one prepared you for. It's not the kind you expected. It's slow, coded, almost imperceptible to an outsider. But to you now, it's loud as a drumbeat. Take the refectory, for example, the dining hall. Each meal is meant to be eaten in silence while someone reads scripture aloud from the pulpit. You're supposed to reflect on your sins between bites of lentils and dry bread. But the glances exchanged over the bowls say more than any sermon. Clara always sits 2 places down, just far enough to avoid suspicion, but close enough that her foot brushes yours under the table. Every touch is a question, every smile an answer. You learn to interpret body language like holy text. How Sister Madeleine's fingertips linger on the rim of a chalice. How Sister Margot holds her spoon just a little too suggestively when the bishop visits. Everything feels like code, like layered meaning. The world outside would call it sin. Inside these walls, it's survival through softness. The convent isn't made of silence. It's made of small sounds. Breath, cloth, footfalls, gasps. Laughter muffled behind doors, the rustle of parchment, and the creak of floorboards at midnight. You lie awake at night counting them all. You know exactly when the abbess gets up to drink her wine. You know who sneaks into the storeroom, who meets behind the herb garden, and who has begun leaving small petals under your pillow. It's Clara. Of course it is. You never asked her to, but each morning you find a tiny flower there, lavender mostly. She's too careful to write, too smart, but her message is always clear. And still, this isn't a love story. Not really. Not yet. You don't know what this is, just that it's both too much and not enough. Some days the risk terrifies you. Other days, it feels like the only thing keeping you sane. One night Clara pulls you into the shadowed apse of the chapel. It's cold, damp and holy. She presses her forehead to yours and whispers, "I've never wanted to be good." Then she kisses you, soft and slow and shaking, and something in you breaks and reassembles at once. Here's the truth you weren't taught. Desire didn't vanish behind the veil. It just got smarter. Historically, medieval convents were not just centres of prayer, but also education, literacy, and, even more surprisingly, political influence. Some abbesses wielded enormous local power. They controlled land, money, trade routes, even armies of labourers. In some cases, a convent had more power than the local lord. The church pretended these women were cloistered, but really, they were commanding kingdoms in miniature, and yet they were also stuck in bodies. And bodies, no matter how disciplined, are still bodies. Let's throw in a fringe fact, shall we? There are surviving letters, scandalous ones, from medieval nuns to their lovers. One famous example, a nun who begged her former lover, a priest, to return to her, promising he'd find her unchanged. That letter somehow survived centuries of censorship. How many others didn't? It makes you wonder how much of your story will be erased, or worse, rewritten. Inside the convent walls, certain places seem to pulse with more energy. The laundry house, for instance. You would think nothing could be less erotic than scrubbing habits in freezing water. But somehow, that's exactly where everything starts to slip. Rules, propriety, the wet linen clinging to figures under moonlight. Clara's hand accidentally brushes yours. A drop of water rolls down her neck. You both laugh at nothing. No one's around, or so you think. There's a cellar beneath the scriptorium. You find it by accident, or maybe it finds you. A loose stone, a draught, a low stairwell winding down into the earth. You follow it, candle into hand, past dust and cobwebs, into a vaulted room filled with boxes. And among the relics and records and mouse-chewed books, you find the real secret, a diary. Leather-bound, warped with age, written in Latin, but elegant, flowing, intimate. It belonged to Sister Joanna, died in 1272. Inside she confesses her love, not for Christ, but for Sister Alex. She writes of secret kisses, shared beds, passion that burned brighter than incense. She writes of fear, of getting caught, of penance, but mostly of joy, and just like that, you're not alone across time. You copy a few lines and hide them in your own psalter. You don't tell Clara, not yet, but you read them under your blanket by candle stub, and it makes everything you feel seem older, holier, somehow justified, as if love between women had always been part of the sacred, even when the sacred pretended not to see. Now, let's pause and appreciate a little scholarly debate. Historians still argue, were these relationships truly sexual, or were they exaggerated by later moralists? Were the kisses just sisterly affection, or something deeper? The Church would rather leave the question unanswered. After all, an answer would require acknowledging the question. But here in the dark, the answer seems obvious. You dream of Clara's voice saying your name like a litany. You wake to find a pressed violet in your Bible. She knows what you're dreaming. Everything becomes layered. Prayers become poems. Chores become rituals. Touch becomes theology. And summons, your once mandated companion, becomes charged, electric, dangerous. And one day, a visitor arrives. A man, not just any man. Father Lorenzo, the bishop's assistant. Young, handsome, eyes too warm. He's come to inspect the convent's spiritual integrity. You recognise the game immediately. He's not here for God, he's here to sniff out rumours, to root out joy. He watches everyone too closely, especially you. And suddenly, you understand why the others are so good at smiling while lying. Because men like him still believe purity has a look. They think it's pale and soft-spoken and downcast. They don't see the glint of rebellion just beneath your folded hands. He calls you to speak with him, alone. Just a spiritual conversation, he says. Clara's eyes find yours across the chapel, and for the first time you wonder if your little world is about to unravel. The hallway to Father Lorenzo's chamber is too quiet. The kind of quiet that wraps around your ankles and pulls. You walk slower than you should, counting each footstep like a prayer. You haven't been summoned alone before, not like this. Usually it's the abbess who handles spiritual correction, but the church has sent Lorenzo. He says he's here to observe, but everyone knows that's not the real reason. He's here to sniff out scandal, to peel back the veil and see if what the convent claims to be still matches what the church needs it to be. You knock once. The door creaks open on its own. That's not ominous at all. He sits behind a small writing desk, quill in hand, candle burning low beside him. His robe is neat, his hair annoyingly perfect, and those eyes, syrupy brown with a little too much intelligence. You hate the way he smiles, like he already knows what you'll say. "Sister," he says, "please, sit." You do, your knees don't quite touch the floor, and the bench is hard. You fold your hands like a good little nun and wait for the Inquisition. He doesn't open with scripture. Of course not. Instead, he begins with charm. Questions about your background, your studies, whether you've adjusted to life in the cloister, whether you miss anything. His tone is warm, casual, even kind, but every word feels like a trap disguised as conversation. Then he drops it. "There's been some concern," he says slowly, watching your face, "about the atmosphere in this convent. A certain laxity of spirit." Laxity. You almost laugh. That's the word they use when holiness isn't tight enough. He doesn't accuse you directly, not yet. Instead, he circles. He talks about temptation, about discipline, about natural urges, and how they can cloud the soul if left unchecked. He asks if you've ever felt overly close to any of your sisters. It's not a question. You look down, you murmur something vague, something safe. He leans forward, folding his hands like he's praying. "You know, sister," he says gently, "sometimes Satan's influence hides in the sweetest things. Companionship, affection. We must be vigilant." You nod. Inside, your stomach coils. You know what he's trying to say. And worse, you know he's not wrong to be suspicious. Because it's not just glances and petals anymore. It's Clara's breath in your ear at night. It's her fingers brushing over your collarbone, daring the edges of your vow. It's you leaning in, pulling her close, whispering her name like a psalm. And now, one mistake, one misplaced gaze, one overly poetic journal entry, and the whole facade could crumble. He ends the meeting with a warning disguised as blessing. "The Lord sees all, sister, but so do his servants." As you leave, you feel his eyes on your back like heat. Back in your cell, Clara waits for you. She knows. You don't even have to say it. "What did he ask?" she whispers. "Nothing. Everything," you say. That night, you hold her hand under your blanket, fingers interlaced like rosary beads. Neither of you speaks. The silence feels louder than anything you could say. Historically, this kind of surveillance wasn't rare. By the late Middle Ages, the Church had begun deploying men like Lorenzo, visitators, tasked with ensuring nuns weren't becoming too independent, too educated, too alive. They read journals, searched rooms, interrogated sisters under the guise of confession. Some even disguised themselves and slipped into convents at night, hoping to catch forbidden acts in progress. Charming. One fringe detail. In a few records, bishops complained that some nuns had grown too charismatic for safety, a code word historians now suspect, for sexually magnetic. These were women who could influence, inspire, seduce, sometimes without even touching. And the church didn't like that one bit. But there's still debate over how much of this was real scandal versus moral panic. Were these visitators finding actual transgressions, or simply projecting their own fears onto a population of women they couldn't control? Hard to say. But when power meets paranoia, the results are rarely subtle. Back in your story, things are changing. Lorenzo starts watching the entire convent. Mealtimes shift. Chores are doubled. One sister is sent away for reflection. Another is suddenly silent, her eyes dimmer. Whispers dry up. Smiles fade. Fear tightens around the cloister like a cord. You and Clara avoid each other. You don't meet her eyes during prayers. You don't reach for her hand. You barely breathe. But somehow the distance is worse than the risk. Then comes the confession rota. Every sister must speak with Lorenzo, one by one. You hear rumours, whispers about what he asks, about how close he sits, about how his questions feel more like invasions than guidance. When it's your turn, you enter with a prayer on your lips and a lie in your throat. But he surprises you. He doesn't push. Not this time. Instead, he opens a drawer and places something on the table. A letter. Your letter. The one you never sent. The one you wrote to Clara and hid behind your mattress, just to feel close to her when you couldn't risk a touch. The words were foolish, raw, beautiful in a way. A poem written in desperation. He doesn't say where he found it. He doesn't have to. You don't speak. You just sit there, heart pounding, throat burning as he watches your world collapse in front of you. and then slowly he tears the letter in half, then again and again, until it's confetti. "You're lucky," he says. "I believe you can be saved." Saved. That word tastes like rot now. You return to your cell. Clara is gone. No one tells you where, no one says her name. It's like she's been erased, not removed. You lie on your cot and stare at the ceiling for what feels like a week. That night you dream of a violet pressed in your palm, crushed and bleeding purple. You don't ask where Clara's gone. That's the first rule of losing something in the convent. Pretend it was never there. If you ask, you mark yourself. You raise eyebrows, you invite whispers, so you keep your mouth shut, you do your chores, you attend prayers. You copy lines of scripture you can barely see because your eyes won't stop stinging. But you don't ask. Still you look for her in every corridor. You see her in shadows, in flickers of candlelight, in the press of a breeze that moves your veil just slightly to the side. Your hands still remember the shape of her. Your lips, the softness. But the world around you pretends she never existed. The other sisters notice. They don't say anything either, but you catch their eyes on you. Pity, fear, judgment. Some of them knew, maybe all of them, maybe none. Clara was discreet but not invisible, and love, even hidden, leaves trails, footprints in the dust. The kind Father Lorenzo seemed disturbingly good at following. He stays longer than expected. His inspection becomes a residency, a rot with a name. He walks the halls with the air of ownership now. The abbess doesn't challenge him, she just nods, silent and grey-faced, as if his presence is God-ordained. Maybe it is. That's the danger of letting men write scripture. You keep your head down and count the days. You speak less, eat less. You fade just slightly, hoping to disappear the same way Clara did. But something in you resists total erasure. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's anger, maybe it's the absurdity of giving everything to a system that never asked who you were, only what you could surrender. That's when you find the door. It's hidden in the old chapel, the one no one uses anymore. Too draughty and half collapsed. You only go there to escape, to sit among broken pews and sing psalms into the silence. But on the third visit, you notice a stone in the floor, slightly out of place. You push it. It shifts. Beneath it, wood. A hatch. Of course you open it, because what else is there to lose? The ladder creaks. The air smells like dust and forgotten things. You descend into a narrow tunnel, candle in hand, unsure whether you're chasing freedom or just trying to feel something again. The tunnel leads to another chamber, and in that chamber, another door. It's locked, but a piece of cloth is caught in the hinge, black wool, habit fabric, and stitched into the hem in tiny thread. A. Clara. You sit on the floor and breathe. She came this way, recently, maybe, or long ago. You can't tell, the air is stillborn. But the cloth is clean, not rotted, not old bambouet. That means something. She's out there, somewhere. Let's pause here for a curious fact. Many medieval convents had hidden tunnels and escape routes. Not for dramatic elopements, but for practical reasons. War, fire, bandits, the occasional need to smuggle in food or smuggle out an inconvenient pregnancy. But those same tunnels became channels of secrecy. Lovers met there. Illicit trysts happened in the dark. Some sisters disappeared into them, never to return. There are even reports of tunnels connecting nunneries to nearby monasteries. No one ever officially confirmed it, of course. But once you've seen what humans do with a locked door, you stop being surprised when they find a key. And now, here's the scholarly debate. Were these tunnels symbols of resistance? Of freedom? Or were they built by the same church that locked women away? Just more subtle tools of control? Some argue the tunnels were meant to protect. Others claim they existed solely so male clergy could come and go as they pleased, without anyone outside the walls knowing. Either way, they existed, and you've just found one. You don't go back through it that night. You can't, not yet. You need to plan, watch, wait. But now you know, there's a way out, or at least a way through. And more importantly, Clara may not be gone in the way everyone pretends. The next day everything tastes like purpose. You drink your watered wine and think about the way her hair smelled when the wind caught it. You recite your psalms and think about the pressure of her hand against your spine when you leaned in too close. She didn't run. She vanished with a plan, and now you need one too. The abbess seems distracted. Not afraid, exactly, but smaller, as if something has slipped from her grasp. You catch her one morning staring into her cup, muttering to herself. Later that evening you see her holding a letter, hands trembling slightly. When she notices you, she tucks it quickly into her sleeve and says nothing. That night, you sneak back to the old chapel. The cloth is still there. This time you press your ear to the door. Silence. Then something. A scrape. A shift. A breath. Clara, you whisper. Nothing. Or everything. You're not sure. You don't sleep. The dreams come anyway. You see her face, not frightened, not sad, but determined. She says nothing. Just holds out her hand, palm up, waiting. You wake up with your own hand extended in the same way, reaching into empty air. The church teaches that longing is dangerous, that it opens the door for sin to enter the soul. But what if longing is what makes you whole? What if it's the one honest thing you still have? In the week that follows, Father Lorenzo begins tightening his grip. He changes the prayer schedule, implements surprise cell inspections, demands written confessions. Sisters cry in hallways now and no one comforts them. You're asked to copy down a reflection on temptation. You write it, but the words don't belong to you. They belong to the part of you that's still pretending. But underneath something else grows. A new you. One who knows there's more than just survival. One who knows love can live underground, in tunnels, behind doors, inside whispered names. That even if the church burns every record, every letter, every poem, you still existed. And so did she. You begin collecting things, bread, dried fruit, a candle stub, a tiny flask of oil. You hide them in the chapel near the hatch. It feels like rebellion. It feels like resurrection. It feels like hope. One night you find a new petal under your pillow. Just one. A violet crushed. Your heart nearly stops. She's alive. Word count 1098. The violet on your pillow might as well be a thunderclap. After weeks of silence, suspicion, and that hollow ache where Clara used to be, this single crushed petal is everything. You stare at it so long it blurs into a purple smear. It smells faintly like her. Earthy, clean, a little wild. It's real, which means she's real. Alive, close, watching. You don't sleep, you lie awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart pacing like it's trying to beat out of your ribs. You keep the violet tucked in your palm, curled like a secret. In the morning it's wilted and brown and perfect. You hide it inside your psalter, right between the pages where David begs God not to abandon him. Good company. That day you move differently, slower, lighter. Lorenzo's eyes are everywhere, but you're no longer afraid. You've begun playing your own game. The sisters are ghosts of themselves, drained, watchful, all sharp glances and silent prayers. You want to tell them there's a way out. But you don't. Not yet. Because not all of them would want to leave, and not all of them could be trusted. Instead, you go back to the old chapel after Vespers. Your steps echo in the broken nave, where sun filters in through fractured glass and dust dances like incense. You open the hatch and descend again, heart thudding in your ears. The air is cooler this time, damp stone, mould, the faintest trace of wax. You reach the door again. The cloth is gone. Your breath catches. You press your ear against the wood. Nothing. Then faint. Barely there. A cough? A whisper? You knock once. Silence. Then, just when you're about to give up, one knock from the other side. It's not much, but it's everything. That night you tuck a note beneath the floor tile. Just a scrap of parchment. A single word. When? The next day the scrap is gone. In its place soon. Soon. You roll the word around in your mouth like honey. You say it silently during prayers. You whisper it into your soup. You write it over and over on the edge of a scrap you'll later burn. It becomes a promise, a prophecy. Meanwhile, Lorenzo's grip tightens. The cloister feels like it's shrinking, collapsing in on itself. He makes Sister Isabel sweep the halls after every meal, to keep her busy, he says. The abbess begins fasting for clarity, which looks a lot like nervous collapse. Rumours bubble under the surface. One sister confesses to having impure thoughts about another. Whether it's true or forced out of her, no one knows. She's gone the next day. You begin to see how the system eats itself. Fear feeding fear. Faith turned into surveillance, and at the centre of it, men who call it righteousness. Here's a historical truth that makes your skin crawl. Convents in the Middle Ages weren't just religious communities. They were also political prisons. Noble families sometimes used them to stash inconvenient daughters. The church used them to reform women too educated, too powerful, too difficult. You weren't always called to God. Sometimes you were just shoved, and yet some of these same women found ways to resist, through art, poetry, secret networks of letters. One nun in the 15th century famously bound her writings in a book she hid inside a false-bottomed reliquary. A literal saint's bone case. When they found it, it was burned, but fragments survived, enough to know it was love poetry. So maybe this is tradition, in its own strange way. Not the kind written in gilded Latin, but the quiet kind. Petals under pillows, knocks through walls, the defiance of memory. You and Clara begin to communicate through signs. A smudge of ash in the corner of the floor tile means wait. A feather means tomorrow. A thorn means danger. You invent a whole language beneath the nose of God, or at least Lorenzo. It's exhilarating, terrifying, sacred, and it's working. Then one afternoon you find more than a note. It's a small bag, left behind the floor tile in the chapel. Inside, a crust of bread, a bit of cheese, and a twist of cloth. When you unwrap it, you nearly laugh. It's your rosary. The one Clara always borrowed. The one you thought was lost. She's telling you, I still have you. And now you know, it's time. You spend the next 2 days preparing, quietly, methodically. You say your prayers with extra fervour. You copy scripture with monkish precision. You keep your eyes down. You become once again the perfect nun. And no one notices the tiny knife you've hidden in your sleeve, meant for candles, you tell yourself. No one notices when you start collecting oil-soaked cloth scraps from the lamp room to clean the icons. No one notices the small satchel full of dried herbs you wrap in linen and tie to your waist. Medicinal, harmless, unless you know how to use them. You're almost ready. You just need one more thing, the key. The door in the tunnel was locked, and you haven't found a way around it. Clara must have it, or access to it. But you haven't seen her, haven't touched her, haven't whispered her name aloud in days, so the next note you leave isn't a word, it's a drawing. A key. The next morning it's there, wrapped in black wool, hidden inside the confessional kneeler in the old chapel. You don't ask how she did it, you just hold it like a relic and press it to your lips. And now, let's toss in a fringe fact. In some convents, keys were a symbol of power. The abbess wore them on her belt to show control over doors, food stores and secrets. Keys were status, and sometimes they were passed in the dead of night, from hand to trembling hand like talismans. You wait until the new moon, the night the sky itself conspires to hide you. You fake a stomachache at dinner. You're excused early, you go to your cell, lie on your cot and wait. You count the minutes, the hours. When the bell tolls midnight, you rise. Your satchel is packed, your knife tucked against your thigh, the key cold in your palm. You leave through the chapel, you open the hatch, you descend into shadow, and as the tunnel closes above you, you feel something like freedom brushing your cheek. You reach the door, slide the key in, turn and it opens, and standing there, face smudged with soot, eyes wide and burning, is Clara. Car. You don't speak, you can't. The door creaks open, the tunnel yawns wider, and there she is, Clara, dirt under her fingernails, candlelight flickering against her cheeks like a blush that never faded. Her habit is streaked with dust, her veil pulled back, her eyes locked onto yours like they're the only truth left in the world. You forget how to breathe. You don't even step forward. You just exist there for a long, silent moment that could stretch across centuries. Then, without warning, she pulls you in. Not just into the tunnel, into her arms, into the press of her chest, into the safety you'd convinced yourself was gone forever. You don't cry, not really. The tears don't have time to fall. You just bury your face in her shoulder and exhale. It's the sound of relief, of disbelief, of finally. I didn't know if you got the key, she whispers, lips brushing your ear, or if you'd found it first. You shake your head. I thought you were dead. I thought you'd stop waiting. She takes your hand and leads you deeper into the dark. The passage twists beneath the convent like a forgotten artery. Stone walls weep with dampness. Every few feet you pass another sealed door, another secret that no one above would ever acknowledge. Eventually the path widens into a low chamber lit by oil lamps. Makeshift bedding, a pile of stolen bread, an old wooden crucifix leaning against the wall. I found this place after he tried to question me, she says. The abbess helped. Just once. Just enough. She gave me time to disappear before he did what he came to do. That word, disappear, lands heavy. because it means the abbess knew, and helped. Maybe not out of kindness, maybe just to keep Lorenzo from finding something worse, but still, she chose not to betray Clara, and that means something. Even in this crumbling system, someone remembered how to be human. You sit together on the ground, your fingers intertwine automatically like they're homesick for each other. There's no ceremony to it, no romance, just survival, and comfort, and the need to feel her pulse under your thumb. I can't stay much longer, Clara says. Eventually they'll find the tunnel, or seal it. Then we leave. Leave? She sighs, not with joy, but with the kind of disbelief only desperate people perfect. And go where? The world doesn't exactly have an open door policy for disgraced nuns. We make it. How? You pull the cloth from your satchel, the food, the herbs, the flint. You lay it out between you like a battle plan. Over the hills, you say, or into the forest, toward the coast. Clara raises an eyebrow. You have a map in your head now? I copied it from the bishop's itinerary months ago, before everything, before you knew what this place really was. A pause. She looks at you differently now, like maybe she forgot who you were, just for a moment, and now she remembers. You're not just the quiet one, you're the one who's been planning a way out since long before she disappeared. Fact, escaping from a medieval convent wasn't just rare, it was heretical. Vows were seen as eternal. Breaking them was worse than sin. It was betrayal, apostasy, treason against heaven. Nuns who fled were hunted, tried, sometimes executed. And yet they did it anyway. Enough of them that church records refer to the phenomenon as fuga religiosa, religious flight. A problem they couldn't quite contain. Fringe fact, some of those escapees succeeded, by faking their deaths. Others dressed as men and vanished into merchant caravans or ship crews. There's even a documented case of two nuns running off together and living as husband and wife in a village far away, using forged documents and borrowed names. The church found out 10 years later. They never caught them. But that's history. You're still inside your story, and right now, there's one more thing to do before the escape. You have to come back, you whisper. Clara pulls away. What? Just for one night. 1 hour, long enough for them to stop looking. You're insane. Not entirely. You explain the plan, how you'll sneak her back into the chapel, let her be seen, make her disappearance look like some kind of divine vision. She got lost in prayer. In trance, in something holy. Let them believe she was hiding in the convent the whole time, that she was never gone. It'll kill the hunt, you say, buy us the silence we need. And Clara, bright, fierce, exhausted Clara laughs. You're even more dangerous than I remember. You help her clean up, scrub the dirt from her skin, rearrange her habit. You braid her hair like it was before, you make her look like the image of sainthood, just slightly worn around the edges. Together, just before dawn, you climb back up the tunnel. The chapel is empty, the hatch opens silently. You lead her through the shadows, past the candlelight, past the snoring novices, past the looming crucifix where Christ watches with that eternal weary expression. She slips back into her old cell. You tuck her in like a ghost returning to its grave, and when the bell rings for morning prayer, you act surprised when she walks into the chapel with the others, pale, quiet, changed, as if she's been away, but not too far, never far enough to question. The abbess sees her and doesn't blink, just nods once, so small it might be imagined. Later, Father Lorenzo corners you, his face unreadable. She's returned. You say nothing. He studies you. She says she was praying, that she was lost in silence. You shrug. He leans in, voice low. You believe her? You meet his gaze, steady, calm. I believe God works in mysterious ways. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't question her again, and just like that, the hunt ends. But your journey? It's just beginning. It doesn't take long for the story to spread. By midday, Clara is a miracle, a returned soul, a woman so devout she vanished into silence, praying her way into divine absence and back again. It's ridiculous, of course, but that's the kind of nonsense the church loves. The more improbable, the holier it seems. The sisters speak of her with reverence, careful not to sound envious. Even the abbess puts on a solemn face, though you see the flicker of dry amusement in her eyes. like she knows a good lie when she hears one and respects the craftsmanship. Clara keeps her head down and her voice lower. She eats like a ghost. She folds her hands during Mass with a trembling humility that would make the Virgin herself seem arrogant. No one suspects a thing. The convent sighs with relief, the tension loosening slightly as the mystery resolves itself without scandal. But you and Clara, you don't breathe easy. You can't, because this charade has bought you time, not safety. Lorenzo is still here, still watching, and while he pretends to accept the miracle, you know the man doesn't believe in anything he can't control. You meet in secret now, never in the tunnel. Too risky. Instead, it's the alcove behind the old sacristy, the one no one cleans. The one with the cracked statue of St. Agnes and the half-melted votive candles. You speak in whispers, your fingers brushing just enough to spark, never enough to draw attention. "We'll go the night after the feast," Clara says one evening. "There'll be celebration, noise, wine, less scrutiny." You nod. It's a solid plan. The Feast of the Assumption is just 3 nights away, and the convent will be flush with incense, music, and 1,000 distractions. If ever there were a time to vanish, it's when everyone's pretending heaven is visiting earth. "I want to leave something behind," she adds, "a kind of goodbye." You give her a look. "You're going to write, not a letter, a psalm sort of, for the scriptorium." You laugh under your breath. "Hidden in plain sight?" "Exactly." She spends the next few nights working in the scriptorium, copying ancient prayers while composing one of her own. It's beautiful, layered in metaphor and devotion, but unmistakably about you. About love as salvation. About bodies as temples, not to be denied, but to be entered with reverence. You watch her write from across the room, your own quill stuttering on the page. Every curve of her hand is a poem you're too afraid to read aloud. One afternoon, you find a folded scrap slipped under your mattress. Just one line. "Your voice was the first prayer I ever believed." And suddenly, your vow of silence feels like the real sin. Now, here's your historical fact of the night. Medieval nuns weren't just obedient copyists. Many were scholars, artists, even poets. Some wrote treatises on theology, others penned letters filled with passion and complexity. A few, like Hildegard of Bingen, were visionary mystics who dictated entire books of divine revelation and natural science. But most women's voices were buried under anonymity, claimed by the church or the abbess, or simply lost. Fringe fact, a few illuminated manuscripts from women's convents have tiny hidden images in the margins. Bunnies, snails, even naked figures. Not every one of them is innocent. One particularly scandalous manuscript features a nun spanking another with a switch, both figures smiling. Historians love to call it symbolic. You know better. The sisters had senses of humour. And something else, too. Memory. Rebellion etched in gold leaf. Meanwhile, back in your story, you begin your own quiet rebellion. You leave small traces. Nothing overt, just patterns. You arrange the apples in the pantry into the shape of a heart. You carve a single line of poetry into the underside of the kneeler in the chapel. I was not made to kneel for anyone but you. You press a flower, lavender again, into the abbess's prayer book. When she finds it, she closes the book slowly, runs her thumb along the stem, and says nothing. She's not the enemy, not really. She's a relic of the old world, a survivor like you. She's seen things, done things, maybe even loved once. The night of the feast arrives heavy with incense and heat. The chapel glows like a furnace of angels, the choir sings 3 tones too high, the wine flows, and for the first time in weeks, the sisters laugh without flinching. Lorenzo gives a sermon so dripping with sanctimony you worry he might dissolve, but he's distracted. Everyone is. That's your window. You slip out just after the second procession. Clara follows a few minutes later. You meet behind the garden wall where the roses bloom indecently even in the dark. She wears her cloak tight, hair tucked, hands shaking. "You ready?" you ask. "No, let's go." The tunnel yawns beneath you like an old friend. You close the hatch behind you for the last time. Every step down feels heavier and lighter all at once. You don't speak. There's no need. The silence between you is full of everything that matters. And this time, when you reach the chamber, it's not just the crucifix waiting. It's the future. You light the lamp, you open the satchel, the bread, the herbs, the flint, the rosary. Everything's there. Clara ties the cloth around her waist. You lace your boots tight, you pause just for a second, one last look back, not at the convent, not at the life you're leaving, at the life you're choosing. Then you take her hand, and together you walk into the dark. Now, let's insert an open, scholarly debate to chew on while you walk. Was convent life a punishment or a liberation? For some women it was clearly oppression, but for others it was the only place where they could read, write, speak, think and love without male domination. Some even chose the convent, not because they were forced, but because the outside world offered them nothing better. So what does that make you? A fugitive? A heretic? Or just a woman who wanted more? The forest doesn't welcome you. It tolerates you. The trees stand like ancient watchers, unmoved by your escape, indifferent to your urgency. Their branches claw at your cloak, their roots tangle around your boots like the earth itself is testing your resolve. The night is cold, the ground uneven, and the moon stays hidden, either in solidarity or shame, you can't decide. You and Clara move quickly, following the rough path you've traced only in dreams and stolen glimpses of maps. There's no road, just shadows and instinct. You don't speak much. Breath is precious. And besides, what is there to say that hasn't already been whispered in tunnels and pressed between pages? Every glance between you is its own paragraph. Every squeeze of her hand is a promise. By dawn, your legs burn. You've reached a clearing. Just a patch of grass and a stream so still it reflects your face back at you like a relic. Clara collapses beside it, her hair unpinned and wild, her cheeks smudged with ash. You look at her and think, this is the most sacred thing I've ever seen. No statue, no painted virgin, no gilded altar has ever stirred you like this. You break the bread between you in silence. A communion without chalice or creed, just hunger, shared and simple. She smiles around the crust and says, you chew like a noblewoman. You nearly choke, and you eat like a goat. Laughter. Real, loud, unfiltered. It startles the birds from the trees. The sound of joy, rare and raw. The kind that doesn't need forgiveness. You sleep in shifts. Clara first. Curled beneath your cloak. You sit awake, watching the woods breathe. Every creak of bark sounds like a patrol, every rustle like a shout. You hold your knife like a rosary and murmur a prayer that's more superstition than scripture. When Clara wakes, she's stiff and quiet. I dreamt the abbess kissed my forehead, she says, and said I was already forgiven. You look at her. Do you think that's true? She shrugs. If not, I'll find her in hell and ask. And just like that, the tension breaks again. Let's pause for a historical fact. Did you know some medieval nuns believed visions could be prophetic, not just religious? There are accounts of dreams predicting births, deaths, even disasters. Some were taken seriously by the church, others dismissed as madness or temptation. But these women weren't stupid. They knew their dreams might be the only language they were allowed to speak freely. Fringe fact. One nun in the 14th century claimed she had recurring dreams of escaping her convent, riding a silver stag into the woods. She painted the image onto the inside of her cell door. It was discovered after she disappeared one stormy night. She was never found, though the stag remains. You walk for 3 more days, sleep in hollows, bathe in freezing streams. Trade prayers for curses. When the rain soaks through your satchel and the bread turns to mush, you dry your clothes over a fire so small it barely deserves the name. Clara burns her sleeve and laughs like it's the funniest thing in the world. You tell her she's delirious. She tells you it's the most free she's ever felt. On the 4th day, you reach the hill. It's not much. A rocky rise, steep but climbable. At the top you'll see the coastline, or so you hope. The wind carries salt now, faint but present, and the air feels wider, open, like it belongs to no one. Halfway up, Clara trips. Her ankle twists, she swears loudly, colourfully, and then bites her lip like she's back in the cloister. You kneel beside her. Can you walk? She nods, but her face betrays her. Pain, real pain. So you do the ridiculous thing, the thing you'll tease her about forever if you survive long enough to laugh again. You carry her. Not far, just enough. She protests, flailing and half laughing, but clutches your neck all the same. When you finally drop her onto the grass at the summit, both of you are panting, laughing, crying a little. Then you look up. And there it is, the sea. Not endless blue, this isn't some romantic painting. It's grey, rough and loud, but it's real, the edge of the world, a place the convent never dared name except in hymns about Jonah and judgment. You sit side by side in the wind, watching the waves claw the shore. "We need a boat," Clara says. You nod. "We need names too." She looks at you sideways. "You want to start lying already?" You smirk. "We've been lying the whole time. I just want to upgrade." That night you reach a fishing village. Not large. A few dozen huts, a dock and a tavern with peeling paint and suspicious smells. You don't go in, not yet. You watch from the hills, cloaks pulled tight, faces in shadow. "We can't go in looking like this," Clara murmurs. "They'll know." You nod. "Then we stop looking like this." The next morning you trade the last of your herbs to a toothless healer, in exchange for linen and scissors. You cut Clara's hair first. It falls in dark curls around your feet. She looks 10 years younger. Then she cuts yours, uneven and fast. You bury your habits under a cairn near the rocks. The veils, the wool, even the rosaries. All of it. A funeral without bodies. Just the ghosts of who you were. Clara takes your hand. "No more prayers?" You squeeze back. "Only the ones we write ourselves." Let's pause for an open, scholarly debate. What happens to women who disappear from convent records? Some assume death. Others believe they were transferred or hidden. But more and more historians are starting to wonder, how many echoed? How many lives were rewritten by necessity? There's no answer. Just blank pages. But maybe those absences are their own kind of story. You and Clara walk into the village like travellers. Not nuns, not saints, not sinners, just women. A fisherman with a crooked smile offers you passage south. 1 coin, you don't have it, but you offer your last loaf of bread and Clara offers a song, a psalm rewritten. The man listens, then nods. "Your voice," he says, "reminds me of someone I lost." You board the boat as the sky turns gold. Behind you, the world burns in memory. Ahead, something else entirely. You don't look back. The boat rocks beneath you like a cradle that forgot it's supposed to be comforting. The waves are not gentle. They slap the hull with the kind of casual violence that reminds you just how small you are in the grand design, or lack thereof. You and Clara sit near the stern, cloaks pulled tight, soaked to the knees and beyond caring. The fisherman, whose name you never asked, maybe on purpose, hums tunelessly as he steers through the mist. You grip the side of the boat and try not to look too hard at the water. It's grey and bottomless and smells like salt and rot and promise. Clara watches the horizon, her face unreadable. She hasn't said much since you left the shore, and you haven't pushed. Maybe she's praying, or maybe she's letting go of centuries all at once. You want to ask what she's thinking, but all you manage is, "Are you cold?" She glances at you. Always. You laugh and she smiles, but it doesn't reach her eyes. Not yet. Freedom, it turns out, isn't immediate. It doesn't arrive with trumpets and sunshine. It arrives with nausea, stiff joints, and the knowledge that you've burned your only bridge without knowing what lies ahead. The boat finally docks in a small port city, busier than the fishing village, but still modest. A church spire rises in the distance, stabbing the sky like a warning. You don't go near it. You slip through the alleyways, past market stalls and stray cats, eyes down, ears open. You don't talk about your plans, you just move. You find a small inn by the edge of town. It's run by a widow with kind eyes and a limp. She doesn't ask questions, just counts the few coins you offer, frowns at the amount, and then hands over a key anyway. You get the smallest room, barely enough for the narrow bed and a chipped wash basin, but it's private. It's safe. It's more than you ever expected. Clara lies down fully dressed, eyes on the ceiling. You sit beside her and say, "We made it." "Did we?" You don't answer. You're not sure. Later you bathe. Cold water, rough soap, a tin mirror that tells no lies. You look different now, not just the hair, the clothes, the posture, your eyes. There's something sharp there, like you've finally grown into them. Or maybe they've just stopped apologising. Clara joins you. No modesty, you've seen every part of her already, in stolen glances. In candlelight, in dreams and memory. But this time it's different. It's not forbidden. It's not dangerous, it just is. She touches your face and says, "I thought I would die inside that place." "You did," you whisper. "We both did." She leans forward and her lips find yours. Not like before, not cautious or stolen, but firm, certain. You kiss her back with everything you haven't said, everything you've been saving. The room spins. Your heart stutters. This is not lust. It's not rebellion. It's arrival. Afterward, you lie tangled in each other, half asleep, half afraid to close your eyes. "Where do we go next?" she asks into your collarbone. "I don't know," you admit. "Somewhere the church won't look," she hums. "That doesn't exist." You laugh. Then we make it. Now for your historical fact. In medieval Europe, there were places where fugitives, especially religious ones, could claim sanctuary. Some were even towns that thrived on harbouring those on the run. The law would hesitate to pursue anyone within these zones of mercy, at least for a time. For escaped nuns, though, the church rarely respected such boundaries. They were considered doubly dangerous. Women who defied both gender roles and God's direct authority. The punishment? Usually imprisonment, sometimes execution. Sometimes, if the bishop was in a forgiving mood, they were simply shoved into a worse convent and forgotten. But some disappeared entirely, gone from the records, their names scrubbed, their existence denied. Fringe fact? In southern France, there's an old cave carved into a cliffside, inaccessible by road. Locals once believed it was a hermit's chapel. But in the 1800s, explorers found remains of two women buried together, wrapped in cloth embroidered with Latin prayers. One wore a wedding ring. No one knows who they were, but you have a pretty good guess. Back in the present, you and Clara begin to build a life. It starts small. You buy new clothes, simple, modest, but yours. You find work, menial at first, cleaning for the widow at the inn. Clara sings at the market for coins. Her voice stops people in their tracks. She could sing a tax list and make it sound holy. At night, you read by candlelight, not scripture, stories, histories. You teach Clara to read better Latin. She teaches you how to lie without blinking. And slowly the ache begins to fade. Not completely. There are days when the memory of the convent comes roaring back, the smell of wax, the sound of the bell, the feel of stone beneath your knees. You flinch when a priest walks too close. You avoid looking at cathedrals, but each time you kiss Clara's temple or wake up to her snoring softly into your shoulder, you remember why you left. You start writing again, not just in secret. In a journal you keep hidden beneath the floorboard. Yes, but also on scraps you leave in odd places, tied to trees, slipped into books at the market, etched into benches, little stories, hints, warnings, proof. You sign each one the same way, Sister No One. Let's talk about the open scholarly debate. Some modern historians argue that stories like yours are fantasy, that romantic relationships between nuns were rare, exaggerated by the modern minds hungry for rebellion. But others disagree. They point to letters, diaries, court documents, to patterns, to poetry so intimate it could only come from love. They ask, why is it so hard to believe that women, locked away from the world, would turn to each other for comfort, for connection, for survival? You live quietly, long enough to stop counting the days, long enough to imagine what a future might look like. You don't pray anymore, but you still light candles, for Clara, for the abbess, for every girl who couldn't escape, for the ones who never made it to the sea. The thing they never tell you about surviving is that it's boring. Not the running, not the fear. Not the moments where your whole body shakes from the weight of a choice, but the afterward. The part where nothing happens, where you sit at a market stall selling herbs to people who don't look you in the eye, where you sweep the same stretch of in-floor until you know each board by name, where Clara hums the same 3 psalms in different keys, just loud enough to keep you both from thinking too hard. Freedom is quiet. You expected it to be louder. It's been a month since the sea, 31 days if you're counting, and you are. You keep track in the back of an old prayer book with the psalm scratched out and new words written in, not Latin, not anymore. Just you, just her, just survival as liturgy. You and Clara live in the attic of the inn now. The widow, whose name turns out to be Isabet, lets you stay for almost nothing. You cook, you clean, you don't ask questions. She doesn't either. You're not sure if she knows, or suspects, or simply doesn't care. Maybe she recognises something in your faces. Maybe she's just tired of asking where people came from. One morning you wake up before Clara. Her mouth is slightly open, her brow furrowed, and she dreams loudly. Always has. You watch her for a long time, thinking how strange it is to love someone in daylight, to have it without secrecy, No curtain-sid alcoves, no hushed prayers to cover the sound of breath. Just the soft creak of floorboards and the smell of old wood and a woman you chose. You slip out and walk through the town before the sun rises fully. The fishermen are already dragging nets. The bakers are yawning into their flour. You buy a heel of bread with a coin you earned yourself and eat it while sitting on a low stone wall, your feet swinging like you're 15 again. A priest passes by, not Lorenzo, just a local man with a kind enough face. Still, you freeze. Your body remembers before your mind does. You lower your head out of instinct, then raise it again. You meet his gaze. He nods and walks on. That night, you light a candle in the attic. You whisper, "I don't miss you." Clara looks at you from the window. Do you miss who you were? You think about it. The girl in the veil. The one who flinched at every raised voice. Who kept her secrets tucked behind scripture. Who believed that devotion could be enough. I miss the certainty, you say, but not the lies. Clara nods, her profile golden in the candlelight. They made us saints before we had time to sin. Now for a historical moment worth whispering about. The church in the Middle Ages feared female mysticism almost as much as it revered it. Women who claimed divine visions were elevated as holy, until their words stopped aligning with doctrine. Some were canonized, others were tortured into silence, and some, like Marguerite Porete, were burned at the stake for writing spiritual texts the church deemed too independent. She was a beguine, not a nun exactly, but close. Her crime? Claiming that the soul could unite with God without church or clergy, dangerous stuff, especially coming from a woman. Fringe fact, Porete's book was destroyed. But it resurfaced anonymously, passed hand to hand through whispered networks. Translated, copied, survived. Because truth, once spoken, is hard to kill. You begin writing your own version of the truth. Not for publication, not for posterity, just for the two of you. Stories about girls who ran, girls who fought, girls who kissed each other in gardens and burned the convent down behind them. You write by the moonlight, and Clara edits you with a piece of charcoal and a smirk. Too much metaphor, she says. Just say she wanted her. She's right. There's a night when you fall asleep with ink on your fingers and wake to find she's rewritten an entire page. Her words are simpler, but they burn hotter. And then one day, the past finds you. It arrives not in the form of Lorenzo, not in guards or bounty hunters or bishops, but in the form of a girl. She's young, 16 maybe, dressed like a servant, eyes wide, hair pulled too tight. She knocks on the door of the inn and asks for Sister No One. Isabet sends her to the attic. You stare as she climbs the stairs, her hands shaking. "Did you write this?" she asks, pulling a piece of parchment from her cloak. "It's one of yours. One you slipped into the pages of a hymn book at the market weeks ago. A story about a girl who swallowed her vows and fled." Clara stands behind you, silent. You nod, slowly. "I need help," the girl says. And just like that, you're not hiding anymore. You're building something. You let her sleep in your attic that night, and in the morning she tells her story. Her name is Agnes. She was promised to a convent by a father who thought her too bold. She ran. She doesn't know where to go. She doesn't want to go back. You teach her how to blend in, how to listen without reacting, how to pray without meaning it. Clara teaches her how to sing. You give her one of your stories to carry, folded and hidden in her bodice, just in case. And she leaves, heading north, with your old shoes and a new name. After she's gone, you and Clara sit on the roof and say nothing for a long time, till finally Clara says, "We didn't just escape." You look at her. "No," you say, "we started something." Here's the open scholarly debate for the night. Were stories like yours unique, or were they part of a broader hidden tradition, an undercurrent of resistance among cloistered women? Some historians argue that for every recorded escape there were a dozen others erased, forgotten, or never written down. Others insist these tales are too romantic, too convenient, too rare to be real. But maybe the real issue is this. People have always been uncomfortable with the idea of women saving themselves, especially from God. You start paying more attention to the girls who linger in the marketplace, the ones who stare too long at the prayer books, or fumble when asked where they're from, or flinch when a priest passes by. They're everywhere, once you know how to look. One leans on a cane that's clearly too tall for her. One wears shoes meant for a boy. One wears her veil like it's trying to strangle her. They don't speak much. but you can see it in their eyes. They're running. From what? That doesn't matter. You already know. Clara starts calling them sparrows. Small birds, easily overlooked, always fleeing something bigger than themselves. You watch them flit through the crowds, pause for a heartbeat near your stall, then vanish again. You begin leaving stories in more creative places, tucked behind loose stones in the town wall, under bundles of lavender at the herb stand, even sewn into the lining of donated cloaks at the chapel's arms chest. One story ends with, "She fled not because she lacked faith, but because she found it elsewhere." You write that one in your best script with your cleanest ink. It's Clara who sees the pattern first. The girls aren't just showing up. They're circling, waiting, watching you and her like you're some kind of myth come alive. Not saints, not martyrs, just women who got away. It doesn't take long before one asks for help. Then another, and another. You're no longer fugitives, you're a refuge. You start calling it the kitchen, because that's where it happens, under the pretense of boiling soup, baking bread, washing linens. You let them slip in through the side door. You give them a blanket, a warm meal, a bed in the attic if needed. Sometimes they only stay a night. Sometimes they stay a week. Once a month. You teach them how to vanish, how to rewrite their names. Clara cuts hair. You burn habits. Isabet never asks questions. You think she's been doing this long before you ever showed up. Some girls leave behind letters they were too scared to send. You keep them in a box under the floorboard. You read them sometimes when the quiet gets heavy. One begins, "Forgive me, mother, but I would rather be damned on my own terms than saved on yours." You fold that one carefully, twice. Historical note here. There's sparse but compelling evidence that underground networks like this may have existed. Loosely organised, quiet, ephemeral. No formal names, no doctrines, just whispers and way stations. Some were tied to beguines, others to outcast communities of midwives, herbalists, and what the church would later call witches. The line between helper and heretic was razor thin, and women like you walked it barefoot. Fringe fact, in a 13th century letter from a bishop in Bohemia, there's a complaint about young women forming secret alliances of affection and defiance. He doesn't call it love. He calls it spiritual disorder, which is, in its own way, hilarious. Back in your story, you and Clara adapt. You begin crafting new codes, marks on alley walls, knots in ribbons, certain ways of arranging herbs on a market table. You learn to tell the difference between fear and hesitation, between those who want freedom and those who want safety. Not all girls want to run. Some want to fight. You admire both, but it wears on you. Slowly, like getting water through stone. You flinch at every knock on the door. You check shadows too often. You stop sleeping through the night. Clara sees it. She doesn't push. Just holds you a little tighter in the dark. Sometimes she hums, not hymns, never again, but old lullabies from before the convent. You don't ask where she learned them, you just listen. One night a girl arrives in full habit, still warm from travel, still shaking. She's maybe 15. She doesn't speak for hours, just clutches a rosary so hard it cuts her palm. You bandage her hand while she cries, not loudly, just steady, slow tears like a leaking roof. You ask her name, she says, "Julita." Then she adds, "I killed him." You don't ask who. Clara presses a mug into her hands and says, "Good." You let her sleep. Later in bed you whisper, "What if they catch us?" Clara sighs. "Then we're caught, but we'll be caught together." You kiss her shoulder. "Still worth it." She turns to face you, hair loose, eyes steady. "I never even hesitate." The next day you take Julita to the river. You burn her habit. She doesn't look away. And here's the open scholarly debate for tonight. What do we call the space between sin and survival? Were women like you morally compromised or morally clear in a world built to erase them? Some historians still argue that queer relationships between nuns were nothing more than emotional crutches, platonic intimacy exaggerated by proximity. But then why the secrecy? Why the risk? Why the trail of scorched letters and destroyed journals? If it was harmless, why bury it? You think about that when you help Julita bury her rosary by the riverside. She presses her hands together, not in prayer, but in thanks, not to God, to you. You smile, but it hurts, because there's a different kind of holiness in being chosen, and a different kind of exhaustion in always running. But this is your life now, not a vow, not a calling, a purpose, And that's harder to walk away from than any convent gate. It's around the third girl who arrives bloodied and barefoot that you realise you've become more than a refuge. You're a confession, a whispered myth, a place people crawl to when even God feels like a closed door. And now, more than ever, you're sure. The church knows. Maybe not exactly where you are, maybe not your names, but someone, somewhere, has noticed the cracks in the wall, the missing novices, the girls who vanished into smoke and rumour. Lorenzo might be gone, but men like him are everywhere, poking around libraries and convent registries, flipping through prayer books like they're hunting spells, and maybe they are. Still, the girls keep coming. You no longer keep track of them by number. You remember them by the look in their eyes, the way they flinch when someone says father, the way they stand too straight, as if being small might invite punishment, the way they reach for each other, but stop, mid-gesture, like they've forgotten how to accept softness. Clara teaches them music. She says it's less about the melody and more about learning to use your own voice again. One girl, Elisenda, can't speak above a whisper, but sings like her throat remembers what her mind has tried to forget. Another, Marin, refuses to sing but writes verses that make you cry into your soup. You teach them how to disappear, like just not how to flee, but how to unlearn. How to break the habits of fear, how to eat without guilt, how to walk without apology, how to laugh without waiting for permission. It's harder than it sounds. You make them burn things, letters, veils, names they no longer want. One girl asks if she can burn her vows. You hand her the matches. But it's not all grief. There are late nights filled with laughter, quiet games, the smell of baking bread, the clatter of wooden spoons. Clara teaches them to curse in 5 languages. You pretend to be scandalised. Isabet knits everyone's scarves for winter and pretends she's not getting attached. It starts to feel like a home, which is terrifying, because nothing this good lasts. You feel the shift before it happens. One morning, a merchant arrives in town. Young, friendly, overly inquisitive. He asks too many questions. About the girls at the inn, about Isabet's helpers, about you. He doesn't wear a cross, but he smells like cathedral incense. You and Clara watch him from the shadows of the bakery, hearts suddenly remembering what they're for. He's not from here, Clara murmurs. No, he knows. Not yet, but he will. You don't panic. You repair. That night you take down the box of letters hidden under the floorboard. You burn them one by one. The names, the stories, the pressed petals. You do it with trembling hands. Clara doesn't stop you. She only watches, holding the tinderbox open. You gather the girls. All of you need to decide, you say, tonight, stay or scatter. But if you stay with open eyes. If they come, they'll burn this place down. They don't hesitate. We stay, Yulita says, her jaw clenched. We're not scared, Elisenda adds. You believe them. But you also know better. Everyone's brave until the boots are at the door. Let's pause for tonight's historical fact. During the Inquisition, the Church didn't just go after heretics who spoke out. They targeted anyone who created space for doubt to grow. Herbalists, widows, women with books. Entire convents were investigated if too many sisters had visions that didn't line up with doctrine. One monastery in Spain was closed for encouraging ecstatic expression. Translation: they were probably letting women be too honest. Can't have that. Fringe fact: there's a documented case in 1321 of a nun who was exiled not for sexual misconduct, but for teaching the others to write their dreams. Her writings were confiscated. Only one line survived, scratched into the edge of a wooden bowl. The body remembers what the Church wants us to forget. You start sleeping with your boots on again. Clara sharpens knives she pretends are for vegetables. Isabet installs a hidden hatch beneath the kitchen, an escape tunnel, not unlike the one that saved you. And just when the tension is at its worst, the girl arrives. She's different from the others. She doesn't knock. She just walks into the kitchen while you're slicing onions and says, "I need a room." You freeze. "We're full," she smiles. "No, you're not." Her name is Adelicia. She's older than the others, maybe 25, confident, clean, unbothered. She peels an apple while standing barefoot in your space like she owns it. Clara doesn't trust her. You're not sure you do either. But you let her stay. She watches. She listens. She teaches the girls how to pick locks and memorize escape routes. She laughs with her whole chest, and yet something in her is wound tight, like a spring waiting to snap. She says things like, The church fears what it can't silence, and purity is just obedience with better PR. She never says where she came from. One night you find her outside, staring at the moon. I was an abbess, she says. You blink. For almost 6 years, my sisters called me mother. She smiles bitterly. But they burned one of my novices. Said she was possessed. Really, she just loved another girl too openly. You want to say you're sorry, but she doesn't want your sorrow. I waited too long, she says. Not again. She stays, and everything changes. Because Adelicia doesn't just want to run or hide, she wants to build. I've seen what we could be, she says, if we stopped acting like we're already lost. And maybe she's right. Maybe this is what comes next. Here's your scholarly debate to chew on. Can spaces of resistance survive within systems built to destroy them? Some argue that any refuge born inside a structure like the church is doomed to rot from within. Others insist that real change can only begin inside the walls, that rebellion isn't always fire and flight. Sometimes it's staying, teaching, loving, choosing. You and Clara sit on the roof that night listening to the wind. What if she's right, you ask? She is? Then we can't just be a hiding place anymore. No, Clara says, leaning against your shoulder. We have to become a home. By the time autumn settles over the village like a threadbare blanket, your little kitchen convent has grown into something no one ever meant it to be. Something dangerous. The kind of dangerous that doesn't scream or burn or sharpen its teeth, but simmers low and quiet like a pot of lentils forgotten over flame. The inn now hums with life. Soft footfalls, whispered stories, laughter pressed between floorboards. Girls come and go, most staying only long enough to remember who they were before the church tried to press them into saints. Some send letters after they leave, always unsigned. One just writes, "I kissed a girl in daylight." You hang that one on the wall right above the hearth. Adelicia calls your growing network a sisterhood of shadows. She says it half mocking, but you can see the pride in her eyes. She draws maps no one asked for. Sketches, roads and crossings, notes on sympathetic merchants, who can be bribed, who can't. She's building something bigger than a kitchen, bigger than even this town. She wants outposts, drop points, letters coded into psalms. You watch her move through your space like she's already 10 steps ahead. You're not sure if you admire her or want to throttle her. Possibly both. Clara, meanwhile, remains your still point. She doesn't care about plans or logistics. She cares about the girl who can't sleep because her nightmares speak in Latin. She cares about making sure there's always warm soup, about holding your hand under the table when it all gets too loud. You once told her she was the eye of the storm. She kissed you and said, "You're the reason the storm came in the first place. And you? You're not just surviving anymore. You're leading, somehow. You, who once barely spoke above a whisper in chapel, you're the one the girls look to now when someone new arrives bleeding, shaking, unsure. You're the one who lights the fire at dawn, who sets the rules, who breaks them when it counts." One night, a girl named Sabina arrives from a distant town, skin bruised, veil torn, knuckles raw. She doesn't speak for 3 days. Then one morning she opens her mouth and recites an entire hymn from memory. Only it's rewritten, every line inverted, every promise broken down and rebuilt into something raw and human. She calls it the Psalm of the Unforgiven. Adelicia wants to hide her. Clara wants to hold her. You hand her a pen. "Write more," you say, and she does. Here's your historical anchor for the night. There were nunneries in the Middle Ages where women lived semi-autonomous lives, teaching, healing, even writing. Some abbesses held more power than the local bishop, but this autonomy existed on a razor's edge. One wrong word, one suspicious relationship, one moment of excessive affection, and it could all be taken away. Convents were both sanctuary and surveillance. Love was allowed, but not desire. Friendship, yes. Intimacy, never. If two sisters were found to be too close, they were separated. Sometimes quietly, sometimes violently. Fringe fact. In the 14th century, a French nun named Jeanne was put on public trial not for loving another nun, but for refusing to deny it. She stood in front of the clergy and said, "If God did not wish me to feel this way, he would not have made her so beautiful." The trial records mysteriously end mid-page. No sentence, no outcome, just silence. Back in your attic, Sabina finishes her rewritten hymnal. You bind it in old cloth and hide it beneath the floor. She's changed after writing. Not fixed, but less hollow. The same can't be said for Isabet. The old widow has grown thin, her hands tremble when she stirs broth. She speaks less. You notice she now lights candles in the early hours, muttering names under her breath. One morning you find her at the table, staring into an empty cup. "They're coming," she says softly. You don't ask how she knows, some people just know. You gather Clara, Adelicia, the girls. "It's time to scatter," you say, but Adelicia shakes her head. "No, this time we don't." You blink. We stay. We stand. The room falls silent. And here's the open scholarly debate. Should resistance be visible to count? Some historians argue that small acts, hiding a fugitive, copying a banned text, sharing a kiss in the cloister garden, were not true rebellion. That real change came only through confrontation. Others disagree. They argue that in a world built to silence women, every choice made in secret was a radical act. Even survival. Even joy. You look around at the faces of girls who were never meant to make it this far. Elisenda, now confident enough to read aloud. Yulita, who laughs more than she scowls. Sabina, scribbling verses in the margins of a ledger. Clara, warm as ever, fingers looped around yours. You don't want to run again. So you make a decision. You stop being a kitchen. You become a convent, not in name, not officially, but in practice. You start organising in shifts. Prayer circles, not to saints but to strength. Confession sessions, only the penance is always the same. Forgive yourself. You create a roster of tasks. Bread baking, soap making, reading, writing, self-defense, letters, poems, codes, maps. You hang a bell in the hallway, but you ring it only to announce dinner. And over the door, painted in charcoal and spit and stubborn hope, you write, "Welcome, sister. You're already forgiven." Adelicia weeps when she sees it. Just once, just quietly. Clara kisses your temple and whispers, "You've always been holy to me." And you smile, because you've finally built something the church can't touch. Not because it's hidden, but because it's true. You name the garden Saint Nothing. It starts as a joke, Clara tossing wilted spinach into a pot and muttering, "We really ought to start planting something other than despair." But it sticks. Someone carves the name into a piece of driftwood and hammers it into the dirt beside the first raised bed. And just like that, your rebel convent has a garden with a name that feels honest. No patron saint, no borrowed holiness, just you, your girls, and the stubborn miracle of things growing in ruined soil. By mid-autumn, the cabbages have started to sprout. The tomatoes refuse to cooperate, too acidic, like half the girls here, but the mint runs wild. You catch Yulita once on her knees, talking to it, not praying, just chatting. She says the leaves listen better than people. There's something strange about the way joy creeps in when no one's looking. Not like a guest, more like a squatter. It shows up in laughter around the hearth, in the way the girls start dancing to Clara's off-key songs, in how Adelicia stops sharpening her knives every night and starts teaching someone else to do it instead. You're still careful. You still lock the doors. You still keep a bag packed in case things go sideways. But for the first time in what feels like forever, you let your guard down enough to plant something, to plan for a future. One morning you wake to find the youngest girl, she calls herself Mouse, and no one's learned her real name, has painted a mural in the back hallway. It's crude but beautiful. A procession of women hand in hand stepping into a forest. No habits, no crosses, no fire behind them. You cry when you see it, not loudly, just enough. You don't say anything when Clara comes up behind you and wraps her arms around your waist. She whispers, "We're getting close, aren't we?" To what? She shrugs. Whatever comes after escape, still, danger hasn't disappeared. It just waits. Every so often, someone sends a warning. A merchant you trust saying a bishop's rider passed through, asking questions. A coded letter slipped under your door. Once, a dead crow left on your windowsill. A message, though you're not sure from whom. Maybe the church. Maybe a girl you failed to save. So you add more layers to the escape plan. You rotate sleeping quarters. You establish a second hiding place in an abandoned house 2 streets over. Isabet helps you fake documents. You learn how to forge a bishop's seal, and Adelicia shows you how to break it again. Just for spite. Historical fact for the night. Some medieval nuns legally outmaneuvered the church by creating their own rules within loosely structured communities. Beguine houses, for example, weren't technically convents. They didn't require permanent vows. Some women moved in and out freely. They weren't always popular with the church, and some were even branded heretical simply for existing outside the hierarchy. but they persisted for centuries. Women apparently have always found loopholes. Fringe fact, in northern Italy, there was a woman known only as La Madre Ombra, the Shadow Mother, who reportedly took in runaway nuns and gave them shelter. Her name appears in 3 conflicting records. One calls her a witch, one calls her a saint, and one says simply, she made women disappear. Adelicia would love her. Back in your garden, the mint spreads like gossip. The girls start brewing it into tea. Mouse insists it helps with nightmares. Clara starts drying it into little bundles and selling it at the market under the name Blessed Sleep. It catches on. People start asking for it. Then for more things, salves, tinctures, even charms. Word spreads as slowly, cautiously. Your convent gains allies. You never call them that out loud. But they start leaving things. Eggs, cloth, news. One old man drops off a basket of mushrooms with a note that reads, "My sister fled a convent once, Binbos. She never made it to the sea. Thank you for making a place where others can." You hang the note in the kitchen. That's when you realise the lines are blurring. You're not just hiding girls anymore. You're treating wounds, teaching reading, burying the past and planting herbs on top. This isn't temporary. This is becoming permanent. The idea terrifies you, because permanent things can be destroyed. You sit in the garden late one night, alone, hands in the dirt. The moon watches you like it knows too much. You whisper, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to hold all of this." And from the shadows, Isabet answers, "You don't have to hold it alone." She limps over, drops to one knee, her joints popping audibly, and pulls out a weed with one swift tug. "I've seen more women fail by trying to do everything than by doing nothing," she mutters. "You've made something. Let it grow." You smile at her. "Since when are you the wise one?" She snorts. "Since I had to clean up after you." The next day you find a gift left in your room. A carved wooden medallion. No saints, no cross. Just 2 hands, intertwined, equal. There's no note, but you wear it anyway. That night you and Clara walk the perimeter. She takes your hand in hers. "You know what scares me?" she asks. You shake your head. That I'll forget what it felt like to live in fear. That I'll start thinking this is normal, safe. That you nod. Fear's a habit like any other. "Do you think we'll ever be allowed peace?" You look at the stars, at the deep blue above your garden. "I don't think we'll be given it," you say, "but we can take it." Here's your scholarly debate for the evening. Can something created in opposition endure without becoming what it resisted? Some argue that all countercultures either dissolve or turn into institutions themselves. That rebellion calcifies. Others believe that resistance, when rooted in care, can evolve, that it doesn't have to harden, it can grow. Maybe your garden is proof of that. Not because it's perfect, but because it insists on blooming anyway. You call it St. Nothing, but really it's everything. The knock on the door comes during supper. 3 taps, then silence. No code, no syscall. It's the sound of something arriving that you didn't ask for. The entire room stills, spoons lower, eyes rise. You and Clara exchange a glance. One of those wordless things you've perfected over time. You nod to Julita, who moves to the wall and palms the small dagger hidden behind the spice rack. Mouse slips out the spack, fast and quiet, to scout from the alley. Adelicia's already standing by the door, her hand just barely resting on the latch. 3 more knocks. Still measured, still wrong. "Who is it?" Adelicia calls. No answer, so she opens it. Standing in the doorway is a man. Not young, not old, clean robes, travel-worn boots, a chain with a wooden cross, the kind given to inquisitorial apprentices. His face is familiar, not from memory, but from type. You've seen him before. In the halls of convents, in the shadows of bishops, in dreams where someone is reading your sins aloud. "My name is Brother Thorn," he says. "I'm looking for a girl." He doesn't mean any girl, he means every girl. You don't invite him in, but he steps over the threshold anyway. His eyes flick across the room. You watch him take it all in, the long table, the bowls of lentil stew, the linen drying above the hearth, the girls who freeze when his gaze lands on them. He's not here to arrest, not yet. He's here to confirm, to smell the heresy. He smiles politely. She would be around 15, blonde hair, eyes, green maybe. She ran from the convent of St. Aurea last month. You shrug. A lot of girls pass through. Most don't stay. He nods like he understands, like this is all just a formality. She's been accused of theft, he adds. and spreading dangerous ideas. Of course she has. That's always the charge when they run and don't come back. Danger isn't the theft, it's the ideas. She's not here, you say evenly. May I look around? You shake your head. Not without a warrant from the bishop. He smiles again, thinner this time. This is a holy matter, not a legal one. Adelicia steps forward, blocking his view of the back stairs. Then take it up with God. For a long moment, no one moves. The fire crackles. Sabina tightens her grip on her spoon. Ulita hasn't blinked in over a minute. You can feel the entire house holding its breath. Then finally, Brother Thorn tips his head. If she arrives, he says, I trust you'll encourage her to return to the light. You smile sweetly. Of course. He leaves without looking back. The moment the door shuts, you bolt it. Hard. The lock clicks like a gunshot. Mouse slips back in through the rear, cheeks flushed. He spoke to 3 vendors, asked about you, said you were a heretic nun in hiding. Clara exhales. He's not looking for one girl. No, you say. He's looking for us. You don't sleep that night. None of you do. Not really. You take turns watching the doors, listening to the wind. You light no candles. You say no prayers. The night feels too fragile to risk either. Here's a historical fact to chew on while you keep vigil. Inquisitors weren't just hunters of witches and heretics. They were also political tools. A bishop with a problem could whisper into the right ear, and suddenly his inconvenient nuns became a problem of doctrine. You didn't need to be guilty. You just needed to be inconvenient. Fringe fact, in one 15th century case, an entire convent was disbanded because 3 sisters rewrote parts of the Book of Hours to include female pronouns for God. When asked why, one said, God speaks to me in a woman's voice. That was enough to brand them anathema. The manuscripts were burned, but rumours say one copy survived, hidden in a box beneath a beguine house, guarded by old women with sharper minds than the bishops ever guessed. Back in your kitchen, Adelicia wants to flee. This place has done its work, she says. We scatter, create 3 more like it, 5, 10, but Clara disagrees. If we run every time they knock, we never stop running. You say nothing, because the truth is, both of them are right. That afternoon, you gather the girls. This isn't just a safe house anymore, you say. It's a question, and now the church wants to answer it. You give them the choice. Stay and accept what may come, or go, now, while the road is still open. No judgment, no shame. 3 leave, quietly, with hugs and food and promises to write. The rest stay. Adelicia still calls you reckless, but she doesn't leave either. Instead, you prepare. You hide the youngest girls in the old bakery next door, beneath loose floorboards. You dig up the second exit under the herb garden. You sew gold coins into hems. You soak cloth in vinegar just in case the fire comes early. You write one final letter. Not to a bishop, not to the abbess, to yourself. It begins, you built something beautiful, that means it can be broken, but it also means it mattered. And here's tonight's scholarly debate. Is resistance still resistance if it chooses to stay? Some argue that true rebellion is movement, action, the constant refusal to be pinned down. Others believe there's a power in holding ground. In saying you've taken everything else, you won't take this. You look around your house that night, your convent, your refuge, your rebellion. It's quiet, soft candlelight. The smell of mint and flour and warm bodies. Clara rests her head on your shoulder, and for the first time you let yourself imagine a future. Not just a survival, a future. But even as you imagine it, you know they're coming. And when they do, you'll be ready, not to run, to remain. The first real sign is smoke on the horizon. Not the kind that dances from chimney pots or bonfires, but a heavier smear of grey, thick as guilt. Someone's burning something that wasn't supposed to burn. You watch it from the garden of St. Nothing, trowel limp in your hand, dirt packed under your fingernails. You know that kind of smoke. It belongs to reckoning. Word comes in with the apples. A farmer's wife trades her harvest for a bundle of mint and very casually mutters, "They're cleansing the convent of St. Aurea. Said the walls were rotting from the inside out." She doesn't look at you when she says it. She just smooths her apron and walks away like she didn't just drop a funeral into your lap. St. Aurea was where Sabina fled from, where she saw too much, where she spoke. Later that evening, Adelicia returns from a supply run with her jaw set like stone. She tosses a folded paper on the table. It's a church bulletin, one of the printed ones, sharp black ink on harsh white pulp. The title reads, "Wolves in Women's Clothing, the Rise of False Sisterhoods." You don't have to read the whole thing, you already know. Somewhere near the bottom you'll find the phrase "danger to the souls of others." You might even be flattered if it didn't make your chest feel like a bell being rung too hard. That night you call another meeting. There are fewer girls than there used to be. Some moved on, others were sent out early when the danger grew teeth. But those who remained sit close, candles flickering in their faces, hands wrapped around cups of weak tea like armour. You tell them the truth. They're not just searching anymore, you say, they're purging, quietly, carefully. The church doesn't knock on doors, they erase them. Mouse, now 17 and taller than you remember, raises her hand. What happens if they come here? You look around the room, the rafters, the cracked window with ivy curling through it, the mural in the back hallway, where faceless women walk into and trees. Then we make noise, you say, enough that they remember us. Here's tonight's historical footnote. The church, for all its declarations of eternal truth, often underworked in silence. Records were redacted, names struck through. Women vanished not with trial, but with the absence of memory. Some scholars refer to it as spiritual erasure, a form of death where your sins were too inconvenient to record and your virtues too dangerous to preserve. Fringe fact: a 14th century nunnery in the Low Countries was investigated for unsanctioned intimacy and unauthorised writings. The bishop found 37 names in the convent registry. When he was done, only 12 remained. The others weren't punished. They were unwritten. You think about that a lot now, so that you decide to make yourselves hard to forget. The first thing you do is write everything down, not in code. Not in metaphor, not as allegory or poetry or psalms. Just facts, names, journeys, kisses, escapes. You gather every scrap of memory the girls can offer, and you bind them one by one into rough parchment books. You hide them inside loaves of bread, between the floorboards, beneath the outhouse pit. Adelicia's idea. She's nothing, if not practical. You call it the Archive of Refusal. Clara writes the foreword. It begins, "We were here, we are still." Then you start sending copies out. Not many. Just a few, trusted hands, merchants, widows. The one toothless old healer who speaks in rhymes and smells like rosemary and old wine. No one questions her. You've no idea how many books make it. But you send them anyway. Then you start speaking louder. Clara sings in the square. Not hymns. Ballads about girls who ran barefoot through cloisters, who kissed in chapels, who carved names into stone and dared anyone to scrape them away. People stare. People whisper. Some cross themselves. You sell more herbs at market, but now they're labelled plainly. For strength, for clarity, for sleep without guilt. Sabina carves a small altar in the woods outside town. Just a pile of stones, a flower, and a message etched in Latin. God is not afraid of your body. It lasts 6 days before someone smashes it. She rebuilds it on the 7th. You hang a banner outside the inn. Not big, not flamboyant. Just enough. It reads, "This is holy ground." And it is. Because holiness, as you've learned, is not in the rules. It's in the refusal. It's in the girls who kiss scars instead of hiding them. In the laughter that echoes through rooms built by grief. In the quiet moments when someone admits they don't know what they believe anymore. And you tell them that's fine. Here's tonight's scholarly debate. Can memory be a form of protest? Some argue that remembrance alone is passive, that it needs action to count, and others say memory is resistance in its purest form. Because in remembering you deny erasure. You push back against silence, you become a witness. So you witness. Every night you gather by candlelight and speak a name, not of saints, but of those who didn't make it. You speak the girl whose convent cell was locked from the outside, the one who drowned in a baptismal font, the one who kissed her friend too openly and never spoke again. Each name followed by, "She was loved." Then one day the messenger comes, not a soldier, not a priest, just a boy, barely old enough to shave, with ink-stained fingers and a nervous twitch. He delivers a letter. Sealed in black wax, you open it, read it, burn it. Clara asks, "What did it say?" You say, "They're coming soon." Do we run? You look around at your garden, the mural, the herbs drying above the fire, the books hidden in hay bales. the girls curled up in corners, alive and laughing and loud. No, you say. We root. You bury more books, you memorise maps, you tread with sticks and blades and voices sharp enough to pierce doctrine. You build, because when the church comes again, it won't find silence, it'll find a choir. You never thought much about turnips until the day Adelicia explained they could be used for birth control. The look on your face must have been something, pure church-trained horror, because she laughed so hard she almost tipped off the stool she was balancing on. She was labelling salves, muttering under her breath about new recipes, and just casually said, if you carve out the core, soak it in wine, and leave it overnight, it can be persuasive. You stared. Persuasive. She raised her eyebrows. In not getting pregnant. A turnip's as good a shield as a psalm. You had questions, so many questions, and most of them boiled down to, how do you know this? But you didn't ask. You were too busy unlearning, too busy feeling your convent-trained certainty rot under the warm sunlight of real, imperfect, radical life. Birth control wasn't something you thought about in the convent. Why would it be? Your body, like your soul, belonged to God, or more accurately to the church. The only thing they taught you to protect was your virtue. But here, surrounded by women who had clawed their way out of silence, you started to understand that control meant something else. Control was autonomy, choice, the ability to say no, or yes, or later, or never again. Clara finds you in the garden later that day, holding a turnip like it's a grenade. She squints at you. You're still thinking about it, aren't you? You nod slowly. Why didn't they teach us this? She shrugs, gently tugging the root from your hands. Because women who know what their bodies can do are harder to shame. And that right there is the whole truth in a single sentence. You begin gathering knowledge like kindling. Isabet has a book, small, leather-bound, practically disintegrating, filled with midwifery notes passed from hand to hand across generations. Diagrams sketched in charcoal, recipes scribbled in the margins. It's not just about babies, it's about cycles, brews for bleeding, herbs for pain, ways to end pregnancies quietly, safely, long before anyone else notices. You copy the pages at night, by candlelight. Clara sits beside you, reading aloud from Sabina's poems, her voice low and steady. You feel like a thief, a librarian, a midwife, a revolutionary. Maybe all at once. Fact check for the night. Medieval women absolutely knew how to avoid pregnancy. They weren't ignorant, they were silenced. Recipes for herbal contraceptives and abortifacients appear in texts across Europe, often disguised as treatments for excess womb heat, or wandering humours. Pennyroyal, rue, mugwort, silphium, these weren't mysteries, they were survival tools. Women shared them in whispers, passed them between each other like secret prayers, until the church caught on, and once it did, it cracked down hard, fringe fact. In 1322, a midwife in France was executed not for sorcery or heresy, but for encouraging women to escape the burdens of their station. Her crime? Teaching poor women how not to get pregnant. The church's reasoning was that it disrupted the divine order of things, that suffering was sacred, that childbirth was a holy punishment for Eve's curiosity. You'd like to punch that bishop in the mouth. Back in your kitchen, Adelicia is preparing what she calls the quiet tea, a mix of mugwort, parsley, wild ginger and honey. It's bitter, but it works. She tells the girls how to make it, how often to take it, how to bury the remnants deep so no one gets curious. One girl, barely 16, asks if this is a sin. Clara answers, it's a sin to lie about what your body needs. You don't say it aloud, but you think, it's also a sin to make a girl carry someone else's punishment in her womb. Soon, the quiet tea becomes just another recipe on the shelf, next to cough syrup and balm for bruises. The shame dries up faster than the herbs. Mouse designs a coded label for it, just a pressed violet glued to the jar. No name, just knowing. Meanwhile, Julita and Sabina start teaching self-defense in the alley behind the inn. It begins as a joke, Julita flipping Sabina over her shoulder during an argument about cooking, but it turns into something real. The girls train in secret, learning how to fight in silence, how to disable a man twice their size with a broom handle and the right leverage. Adelicia watches and mutters, now that's how you keep the peace. The town begins to whisper, not in anger, in awe. People start dropping by the inn not for tea or bread but for advice. Wives, daughters, widows, they sit in the garden, ask questions in hushed tones, and leave with small bundles tucked into their cloaks. You see it in their eyes, that same flicker of awareness you felt the first time Clara kissed you like it wasn't a sin. And just like that, the rebellion grows again, not with swords, with sage and wild mint. But the church hears about it. You know they do. Because one morning a parchment appears nailed to the town's public board. A warning. To those who traffic in unnatural counsel and false healing, your day of reckoning approaches. God will not be mocked, nor will his servants. It's unsigned. But you can taste the ink, clerical, bitter. That night, Clara finds you in the attic, sitting beside your pages of copied remedies. She kneels beside you. Do we stop? You shake your head. We hide better. Here's tonight's open scholarly debate. Were women's healing practices medicine or heresy? For centuries, the church drew blurry lines. If a man in robes performed a treatment, it was medicine. If a woman did it with herbs and prayer, it was witchcraft. Even today, historians wrestle with the truth. How much of what we've labelled superstition was actually just survival coded in the language women were allowed to use? You tuck the quiet tea behind a false wall in the pantry. You bury the birth records under the floorboards, right next to the archive of refusal. You sew small packets of herbs into the hems of cloaks, and you carve a new phrase into the wood above the kitchen door. No more holy punishment. Because holiness should not hurt, and neither should being a woman. You wake to the sound of boots, not the soft scuff of slippers, or the tread of girls slipping to the outhouse in the dark. These are heavier, purposeful, the kind that land like declarations. There's a rhythm to them, measured and military, even on the cobblestones. Your eyes fly open. You don't scream, you don't shake Clara away. She's already sitting up, her hand wrapped tight around your wrist. They're here, she says. You nod, and for a moment neither of you moves. Then the bells begin. Not church bells. Yours, hung from strings, from rafters, from iron nails and half-buried pots. You hear them chime from the back alley, from the herb garden, from the cellar vent. Mouse rigged them weeks ago. Sabina called them paranoia chimes. You'd smiled then, now you're grateful. You roll off the cot, whisper instructions that don't need repeating. Clara grabs the satchel by the door. Inside, forged documents, hidden coin, the backup key to the bakery tunnel. You shove a second satchel toward the foot of the stairs, prepped for Mouse and Julita. You don't need to call them, they'll already be moving. Outside, boots scatter. Some head toward the chapel, some toward the market, some toward you. They're not bothering with subtlety. This isn't a search. This is a raid. You bolt the front door from the inside, then slide the dresser in front of it. Clara's already by the back window, peering through the gauze. 10 of them, maybe more, she mutters. No robes, not inquisitors, soldiers. You expected priests. This is worse. Someone's made you a threat worth steel. You move through the house, whispering names, nudging shoulders, directing feet. The younger girls, Sabina, Elisenda, Mouse, are already ushering the little ones through the floorboards down into the old tunnel. You hear the soft clatter of boots against stone. Clara stays with you. Of course she does. And then, the front door slams inward with the force of judgment. Wood cracks, splinters fly. The men pour in, black leather and silver clasps, crosses branded onto their chests. They don't speak, they don't ask questions, they take. Isabet is in the kitchen. She doesn't run. She lifts a ladle like it's a weapon. One of them shoves her aside. You don't see her fall, but you hear the sound she makes when she hits the floor, and something in you breaks. Adelicia meets them in the hallway. Blade in one hand, her old abbess ring in the other. You will not touch them, she says. Her voice shakes. Not with fear, with fury. They hit her. They don't even hesitate. Clara grabs your hand. We have to go, she says. But you can't, not yet. You run to the attic, grab the archive, the pages of poems, the drawings, the rewritten psalms, the healing recipes. The girlhoods you swore you'd protect, you stuff them into the satchel. Too heavy, doesn't matter. Outside, screams rise. Not from your girls, from the crowd. The town has gathered, and they're angry. This is the part you didn't expect. The woman who sells eggs is throwing rocks. The butcher's apprentice has a broom handle and zero hesitation. They were not protecting heretics. They're protecting neighbours. Someone shouts your name, not the convent one, the real one. And you feel something settle into place that you didn't know was missing. You and Clara break for the alley. The tunnel entrance is still clear. Mouse left it propped open, smart girl. You slip in, stumble over stone, nearly fall. Clara catches you. The air is thick with dirt and old sweat and freedom. Behind you, the house is a scream wrapped in fire. You don't look back. You emerge beneath the bakery. Crawl up through the false floor. Mouse is there, eyes wide, dagger drawn, ready to fight anything that moves. You hug her hard enough to bruise. Sabina counts heads. Everyone who was in the house has made it out. Adelicia is missing. You want to go back. Clara stops you. She'll kill you if you try, she says, and not metaphorically. Instead, you light the emergency beacon. 3 short bursts of smoke, pale and sweet-smelling, from a chimney on the far side of town. The others know what it means. Your network, your sisters beyond these walls. We've been hit. Scatter, regroup, survive. You head for the river that night. Quiet. Fast. You leave your house burning behind you. You don't know who torched it. Could have been them. Could have been someone trying to erase the evidence. Could have been Adelicia, as her last act of resistance. You pray, not to the god who demanded obedience, but to the one who saw Hagar in the desert and didn't look away. You pray that someone remembered the books. You pray that someone buried the right names. You reach the trees by sunrise, wet boots, sore hands, 10 girls, 2 satchels, 1 future. And here's tonight's historical truth. When convents were raided, there were rarely survivors to tell the tale. The church buried its own sins with quiet efficiency. Property was seized, women were rehomed, and no one asked questions. Those who escaped often had to live as widows, even though no husband had died. They changed their names, cut their hair, hid their scars, but there are records, fragmented, scattered, of something else. Letters referencing the red house on the hill, or the sisters of the silent fire. Clues to something bigger than one sanctuary. Traces of rebellion written in the margins. Fringe facts. In one village in Tuscany, there's a carving inside a church bell tower. Non est muta. Soror ardet. She is not silent. Sister Burns. Open scholarly debate. Was this just metaphor? Or was it code, proof of a wider network? Evidence of rebellion passed through generations in ash and ink. You believe it was real, because you helped build it. You camp that night beside the river, under a sky littered with stars and smoke. Clara pulls you close, wraps the last of the dry cloth around your shoulders, and says, "You didn't fail." You shake your head. "I couldn't save them all, but you saved enough." You close your eyes and see Adelicia's face. Hear her last words. "Make them remember us," and you will. You'll rebuild somewhere else, even if it's with nothing but mud and rage and mint leaves. Even if it takes the rest of your life. Because this fire doesn't end in ash, it ends in roots. The second house is a ruin, not metaphorically. It's an actual ruin. Half a stone wall, a chimney with no fireplace, and a roof that only exists if you squint. You find it 3 days after the raid, deep in the northern woods, past the old sheep path no one's used in years. Clara spots it first through a break in the trees. "There," she whispers, pointing with the quiet urgency of someone offering hope like it might break. "It's nothing." You stare for a long moment, boots wet, shoulders aching, your bag heavier than your body, and then you say, "And let's make it everything." You camp that night in the shell of a former life. Whatever this place was, cottage, barn, hermitage, it's been abandoned long enough for Ivy to claim what's left. The chimney still stands proud and crumbling, and the walls, though mostly open to the wind, offer just enough structure to fool your brain into calling it shelter. You lay your blanket across a pile of moss. Mouse builds a fire in the corner where a hearth used to be. Sabina finds a half-rotted bench and declares it her throne. No one says it, but you all feel it. This is the beginning of the next thing. In the morning, Clara walks the perimeter like a general taking stock of a battlefield. We can reinforce the west wall with timber, maybe lean branches for the roof, and dig a proper trench for waste before someone mistakes the mint patch again. You raise your hand. "It was one time," she smirks. "It was your mint patch." And just like that, laughter comes back to you. Not the wild joy you used to share in the kitchen, but something smaller. Private, earned. Over the next week you build. You use whatever you can scavenge. Planks from an old cart, nails from a hunting cabin, stones from the nearby stream. You cut your hands, bruise your shins, pull muscles you didn't know existed. You learn how to thatch a roof, how to mix mud into mortar, how to hammer quietly. You teach Mouse to bind books. She teaches you to tie knots that don't slip under pressure. Sabina teaches the younger girls how to move silently. And Clara sings again. At night, you gather around a new fire, under a half-built roof, and you tell stories, not just of escape, but of rebirth. One girl, too young to remember her mother's name, begins to call you Magistra. It sticks. You don't correct her. Adelicia is still gone. You don't know if she survived the raid. You don't know if she escaped, or was taken, or walked back into the fire just to spite the church one last time. But on the fourth night in the forest, a crow lands near your makeshift chapel, nothing more than a circle of stones and a carved piece of driftwood. It drops something at your feet. A ring. Her abbess ring. Clara picks it up, turns it over, eyes shining. "She got out," she says. You nod, not trusting your voice. You wear the ring on a cord around your neck. It's too heavy for your hand, too sacred for your finger. Now for a historical fact that makes your hands tremble when you remember it. After certain convent raids, survivors would sometimes retreat to hidden communities, off-the-map villages, caves, coastal islands. Archaeologists have found signs of these places. Female-only settlements with traces of religious practice, but no formal chapel, no clear hierarchy. They weren't official, they weren't sanctioned, but they were real. Fringe fact: in southern Wales there's an abandoned structure with a single Latin phrase carved above the hearth. Domus quae amat. The house that loves. Scholars still argue about what it means, if it was a convent, a retreat, a cult, but you know, back in your ruin you hang a sign carved by Julita, just 3 words, Sanctum fugere sorores. Holy fleeing sisters. You laugh when she shows you. That's not real Latin, you say. She grins. Neither are we. And that's the point, isn't it? You were never meant to be saints. You were never meant to be holy. You were supposed to be silent, small, obedient, useful, but now you're something else entirely. You're the after. The girls begin calling the new place Ashwood, because it rose from fire, because it's surrounded by tree, because it sounds like something from a legend they're writing themselves. And here's the scholarly debate for the night. Can a sanctuary born from flight ever be permanent? Is it destined to collapse under its own secrecy, or does the act of surviving give it permanence of a different kind? Something etched into memory rather than stone. Some argue that any institution built outside law and tradition is doomed to fall. Others believe that survival is legacy, that passing the story on is a form of permanence all its own. You believe in the second one, because every girl who arrives at Ashwood, mud on her hem, fear in her eyes, breath caught between should I have come and can I stay, is living proof. You don't ask where they're from, not at first. You let them eat, wash, sleep. Then you say, what do you want to be called? And whatever name they give, you write it down in a ledger made from stitched parchment and bark. The new registry, not a list of sinners, not a list of lost, just a ledger of women who refused. You no longer run, you no longer hide, but you still plan. If they come again, and they will, you'll scatter like seeds. You've already mapped 3 other sites. One in the caves, one by the coast, one in an abandoned bell tower. You train in silence. In strength. In running and returning, in building fast and hiding well. Ashwood is your route. But it won't be the only one. That night, as the wind howls through the trees and the stars burn like memory, Clara presses her lips to your temple and says, "We are more than ghosts," and you whisper back, "We are the ones they tried to silence, and failed." Winter comes without asking. It always does, of course, but this time it feels personal, like the trees have conspired with the wind, like the frost is just the world's way of reminding you how fragile this all is. At Ashwood, the cold doesn't knock. It walks in through the broken walls, sits at your fire, steals the heat from your bones. The snow falls heavy, not beautiful, not poetic, just dense and wet and relentless. It weighs down the roof and the spirits. You ration food. You wear every layer you have. You start burning things you never meant to burn. Old crates, broken furniture, a hymn book someone smuggled from their convent and once swore they'd keep forever. You watch the pages curl in the flames, and you think about how many things you were once told were sacred. Now, survival is sacred, and even that costs more than it should. The girls handle it as best they can. Mouse teaches everyone how to knit with salvaged yarn, her small fingers moving faster than yours can track. Julita sharpens sticks into spears and organises patrol shifts, just in case the church decides snow makes good cover. Clara invents a new stew every day, each more experimental than the last. She calls it creative desperation. You call it another bowl of wet bark. You find ways to keep hope from freezing over. Urbina writes songs, strange, eerie ballads about sisters who ride through the woods on wolves, who melt snow with their eyes, who turn inquisitors into trees with a single kiss. You know it's fantasy, but it's the kind that keeps frostbite out of your heart. Still, it's not enough. On the 23rd day of snow, one of the younger girls, Lorette, comes down with fever. You try every brew you know, honey, mint, willow bark, but nothing touches it. Her skin burns while the world around her freezes. You sit by her side, wiping her brow, whispering stories from the old days. Not the convent stories, but the ones from before. The ones you made up with Clara in the laundry room, stories about travelling singers and thief saints and women who turned into stars when they died. Clara brings you broth. You don't eat. You just press the bowl to Lorette's lips, praying to anything that might still be listening. She survives, but she wakes changed. Quiet. Distant. She won't speak for days. Clara sits beside you that night and says, "We need medicine we don't have." You nod. "We need everything we don't have." So, for the first time since the raid, you go back into town. Not in habit, not in secret, in broad daylight. Cloaked, hooded, but not hiding. You walk into the apothecary and ask for dried quinine, for valerian root, for salt. The woman behind the counter doesn't ask where you're from, she just squints and says, "You're the ones who lived through the fire, aren't you?" You say nothing. She pushes the jars toward you anyway. That night you boil the herbs over a fire so low it barely glows. Lorette drinks it, sleeps, breathes deeper than she has in a week. You exhale for the first time in days. Let's pause for a historical fact. In the late Middle Ages, women, especially nuns and midwives, were often the guardians of medical knowledge. Not just herbal lore, but empirical, tested treatment passed orally and through marginalia. Many convents had infirmaries run entirely by women, but as the church tightened its grip, male-dominated medicine pushed female knowledge into the shadows. What had once been respected healing became overnight suspicious, fringe fact. A 14th century manuscript from Flanders contains a series of detailed remedies for women's health issues. Most are practical, some are coded. One, written in the margins in red ink, simply reads, "Do not let the men see this." You think about that now, copying recipes in the corner of the new Ashwood ledger. You use a stylus made from bone. Your ink is soot and vinegar. The pages smell like resolve. Still, winter presses on, you dig snow tunnels between buildings, you catch rain to melt, you scrape frost from your boots like it's a second skin. Clara wraps herself around you at night, her breath fogging against your neck. "This is cosy," she whispers, as you lie on straw under 3 cloaks, and a roof that occasionally groans like it's considering collapse. You laugh, but it comes out hollow. Not because you're unhappy, just tired. The kind of tired that's older than sleep. One morning, Adelicia returns. She appears like a ghost, coat dusted in snow, face streaked with soot, eyes bright like coals that never died. She walks into the main hall without knocking and says, "They tried to erase us." Clara leaps up and hugs her so hard they both nearly fall over. Adelicia grins. "Miss me?" You say, "Where have you been?" She shrugs, spreading the word. Turns out the fire didn't end you. It ignited something. The archive survived. At least 2 copies made it into the right hands. One even ended up in the library of a noble woman with more land than loyalty to Rome. She's offered refuge, resources, money. She wants to build a school. Not a convent, Adelicia clarifies. A place where girls can learn everything. It sounds impossible, reckless, dangerous, perfect. You gather the girls that night. Tell them about the offer. Some of us will go, you say. Some will stay, will rebuild here and there, and again and again. Ashwood isn't just a place, it's a blueprint. Here's tonight's scholarly debate. Were these kinds of communities truly revolutionary, or just temporary reprieves? Some argue they were too small to make a dent. Others insist that scale doesn't determine impact. That every girl taught to read, to write, to speak her name aloud without shame, that's revolution. Quiet, maybe, but no less holy. You believe in the quiet kind, because you've seen what it does. You've seen it turn frostbitten girls into warriors. You've seen it make a ruin into a refuge. You've seen it turn a fugitive into a founder. That night you light a candle in the stone circle that passes for a chapel. You say nothing. But in your chest, something hums. A hymn made of silence, a psalm written in soot, a promise reborn in frost. Spring doesn't arrive so much as it slowly remembers how. It creeps in under the snow like an old rumour, melting frost with uncertain hands, trading icicles for puddles, letting the sun peek through like it's been hiding from its responsibilities. The trees hesitate before blooming. The ground resists softness for weeks, but finally, the colour comes back, greens and purples and yellows, so bright they look like they've never heard of suffering. Ashwood breathes again. You hang wet cloaks outside without fear of them freezing solid. You wash your hair without boiling water first. You find yourself humming without realising it. Even Clara smiles wider, like some knot inside her has started to loosen. She's kept the same pair of boots all winter, patched 3 times, and when you tease her about it, she says, "I'd walk through fire again if it meant keeping these." You believe her. The girls dig new beds for planting. Mouse insists on starting with carrots. Lolita demands onions. Sabina, not to be outdone, suggests garlic for warding off creeping men with god complexes. You approve all 3. The earth is stubborn, but it yields, maybe because it remembers you. Maybe because you earned it. Clara finds a dead bird in the mint patch. Tiny, peaceful, frozen mid-flight. She buries it gently beneath the roots, and you catch her murmuring something under her breath. Not a prayer, not exactly. Just words that sound like letting go. Adelicia begins drawing plans in the dirt. Long rectangular shapes, doorways marked in stones, sun patterns mapped by stick. She's building the school in her mind before the walls exist. You crouch beside her, watching her hands move like they've been waiting their whole life for this. "We'll need 10 beds," she says. "No, 12, they'll come in pairs." You smirk. "You planning for companionship?" She winks. "I'm planning for reality." And it's true. Since Winter's Thaw, the girls have started pairing off more openly. There's no shame here anymore, not among yourselves. The affection is as natural as the rain. You catch Mouse braiding Sabina's hair while whispering secrets in her ear. You find Julita and Elisenda reading poetry together with their legs tangled. No one bothers pretending it's anything other than what it is. Intimacy born of safety, a softness earned through fire. One evening, Clara presses a flower behind your ear. "You're growing," she says. "I'm covered in dirt." Still counts. Later that night she writes a new song. It's not a hymn, not quite. More of a lullaby for ex-nuns. It begins, "God didn't abandon you, she just found a quieter home." You cry when you hear it. Clara pretends not to notice. She just keeps singing. Historical fact time. Throughout the medieval period there were moments, brief, quiet, hard to trace, when women carved out real autonomy. Beguine communities, women-led hospitals, even secret scriptoriums where they probably wrote, translated and preserved knowledge that would have otherwise been claimed by men or lost to flame. These places rarely lasted, but they left fingerprints. You've read the texts, you've seen the handwriting shift from Latin to the softer curves of the vernacular. Women teaching women. No bishops in sight. Fringe fact: in a 15th century inventory of confiscated items from a suspect female-led community in the Rhineland, authorities catalogue 37 books. Only 3 were religious. The rest? Astronomy, anatomy, agriculture. One was titled The Language of Fireflies. Scholars still debate whether it was science, poetry or code. You like to think it was all 3. Back at Ashwood, the girls begin writing again. Not just survival notes or warnings or coded messages, but real writing. Poems, essays, plays. One girl pens a comedic dialogue between 2 stubborn abbesses arguing over who's more heretical. It ends with them kissing behind a bookshelf. You applaud. Clara directs it. Sabina builds the bookshelf. It's ridiculous. And it's perfect. The school becomes more real by the day. Letters arrive from allies. One from the noblewoman who first received the archive. Another from a merchant who's been quietly financing your work in memory of his sister, who died in a convent before she could run. The letters come with silver, with paper, with promises. "We'll build," Adelicia says. "We'll build and we'll name it after the ones they burned." So you make a list, not just saints, not just martyrs, the ones who were silenced, discredited, hidden. You find 30 names by spring's end, you paint them on stones, you lay them in a circle, you call it the sanctum of the erased. Clara adds one more. Me? You ask, blinking at the neat letters. She nods. Not because you were erased. Because you refuse to be. And here's your scholarly debate for the night. Is naming enough? Can giving voice to the forgotten undo the silence they were buried in? Some argue it's symbolic at best, self-congratulatory at worst, but others believe naming is an act of resurrection. That to speak someone's truth, even centuries later, is to say, you mattered. You mattered more than the men who tried to forget you. You side with the second group because you know what it means to be spoken into existence again. So you write, you record everything. Not in secret, not in code. You start a chronicle of Ashwood. Its beginnings, its fire, its blood, its laughter. You write your story and Clara's and Alicia's. You write Mouse's poem about the moon bleeding silver. You write Sabina's jokes. You write Julita's stubborn loyalty. You leave nothing out. Not the shame, not the pain, not the mistakes. Especially not the mistakes. Because this story isn't about saints, it's about survival. And spring is a good time for stories like that. Summer slides in like it owns the place. No fanfare, no knock. Just a thick heat that drapes over Ashwood like an uninvited guest who intends to stay the whole season. The air smells like soil and lavender, sweat and ash. The girls tie up their dresses, barefoot in the dirt, their arms streaked with sun and flour and ink. It's the kind of heat that makes everything feel louder. Laughter, arguments, kisses, stolen between garden rows. You'd think danger might quiet them. It doesn't. It just makes them louder, bolder, as if being heard is the only way to stay alive. You don't stop them. Let the church come. Let them hear what joy sounds like when it's been freed from guilt. The school, still just stone foundations and rough sketches, has begun to feel like a promise. There's a frame now, a door. Sabina carved the word Ardor into the lintel, and no one asked her what it meant, but everyone knew. Mouse found an old bell, cracked and crooked, and hung it in a pine tree. She rings it whenever someone learns something new, how to write their name, how to tie a bandage, how to say I'm not afraid without their voice shaking. You ring it the day you realise you're no longer waiting to be punished. That night, you and Clara sneak away from the noise of building and organising and surviving. You find the small stream behind the woods, the one that smells like moss and lightning. You sit with your feet in the water. She brings you wild strawberries. You bring her a page from the Chronicle, the section where you wrote about your first kiss. The one in the laundry closet, the one that smelled like starch and incense and something dangerous. She reads it in silence, then presses her forehead to yours and says, "You saved me, you know." You shake your head. "You saved me. You're both wrong. You saved each other, and it's summer. Let it be romance. You've earned it. Here's your historical footnote for tonight. Some radical female communities in the Middle Ages adopted the language of marriage to describe bonds between women. Letters between nuns reference my chosen beloved, the sister of my soul, even my heart's bride. Were these just spiritual metaphors? Maybe. Were they also coded love letters that dared not speak too plainly? Almost certainly. Some were confiscated, most were burned. A few survived, scraps tucked into walls, inscriptions in the margins of psalters, initials carved into stone under cloisters. Fringe fact, one nun, accused of emotional entanglement, was ordered to sleep in a separate cell with no windows. She carved the word still into the stone. Just that. Still. Still loving. Still waiting. Still believing. Back at Ashwood, you write her name into the sanctum of the erased. You don't know what it was, so you give her one. Soror stillness. You plant wildflowers around her stone. Meanwhile, Adelicia is unstoppable. She's made contact with two more sympathetic communities, one near the coast, another in the mountains. She's organising letters, supply routes, safe passage for girls who can't risk another convent. She's already referring to Ashwood as the first. You say that like we're building an empire, you say one day. Watching her draw new maps, she grins. Not an empire, a constellation. You smile back. Stars don't answer to Rome. But it's not all beauty. There's tension too. One morning a girl named Talia disappears, leaves a note. I don't think I can do this. I need silence again. It breaks your heart a little. Clara says, we have to let them go. That's part of it too. You nod. But later that night, you add Talia's name to the Chronicle. Not under losses, under choices. She didn't vanish, she chose, and that's sacred too. Midway through summer, You hold your first assembly. Not a meeting, not a council, just a circle. All of you seated beneath the pine tree with the cracked bell. You pass a candle, and whoever holds it speaks. No judgments, no minutes, just truth. Elisenda says she still dreams of the convent's bells, even now, even here. But I don't wake in fear anymore, she adds. I wake wondering if I could turn that sound into a song. Mouse admits she used to be afraid of loud voices. Now she uses hers to teach younger girls how to scream if they need to, how to be heard on purpose. Rulita cries, says she doesn't know what she believes, and you all tell her that's the beginning of belief, not the end. When the candle comes to you, you say, I never thought I'd live long enough to be happy, and no one speaks. They don't need to. Because here's the open scholarly debate for this chapter. Is utopia possible, even temporarily, within systems designed to undo it? Some argue no, that safety built on defiance can only last so long before the weight of what resists it comes crashing down. But others argue that every moment of peace, every free breath, is a revolution in miniature. That impermanence doesn't make it less real. It makes it precious. Ashwood isn't perfect. There are arguments, there are injuries, there are days when the rain comes in sideways and floods the bread oven, and you all eat cold carrots and try not to cry. But it's real, more real than anything the convent ever gave you. One day a stranger arrives. An old woman with a twisted cane, hair like steel wool, eyes like unfinished poetry. She says nothing, just walks through Ashwood like she's measuring it, watching, weighing. Finally she hands you a scroll, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed in mustaches, with a sigil you don't recognise. Inside names. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Survivors? You ask. No, she says. Writers. And that's when it begins again. You're no longer just building a school, you're building a library, not for saints, for witnesses. That night you write 2 new lines in the chronicle. We began in silence. We will end in song. The library starts with a table. Not a grand hall, not a tower of books bound in calfskin and gold. Just a table, battered, lopsided, dragged from an abandoned mill house 3 valleys over. Yulita breaks off one of the legs halfway through the journey. Mouse fixes it with a brick and a prayer. No one complains. It holds weight. That's all it needs to do. You set it under the pine tree at first, because there's no proper building yet. Just a space cleared beside the stream, a foundation laid in stones like teeth. Adelicia surveys the site daily like she's commanding a fortress. She's decided this library won't just store books, it will teach them. Reading circles, writing lessons, nighttime lectures under the stars. You joke that she's planning a university, she doesn't deny it. Clara spends her mornings sorting the scrolls and pages and stitched together ledgers from your satchels, the archive, the chronicle, the coded recipes, the unwritten stories written anyway. She hums while she works, occasionally reading aloud. Her voice, low and familiar, makes even the ugliest truths feel holy. You listen from a distance, letting the words soak in through your skin. One day, a girl named Lene arrives with a parcel wrapped in linen. Inside are 6 books and a notebook with the words, "For the ones who remember," scrawled across the front. She says her grandmother kept them hidden in a chest beneath her bed, passed down from a nun who refused to repent. You add them to the collection. No ceremony, just gratitude. Another girl brings music, pages of it, transcribed from memory, rewritten with the names of women instead of saints. You add them too. You don't care if the notes are wrong, you'll teach them anyway. Ashwood begins to shift. It's no longer just a refuge, it's becoming a repository. You're not just saving lives, you're saving truth. And with truth, of course, comes danger. Adelicia is the first to sense it. She catches a whisper from a travelling herbalist. A woman whose niece disappeared after speaking too openly about a book she found. One with a violet pressed between the pages. One with margins full of names. The kind of book that sounds suspiciously familiar. You call a meeting, not an assembly. Not this time. This time it's strategy. They know we're spreading, you say. They know it's more than just us now, Clara nods. Which means we have to be ready for them again. You all remember what happened the last time. The fire, the shattered door. Adelicia's ring dropped like a warning at your feet. But this time, you're not a secret kitchen. You're not a few frightened girls hiding under the floorboards. You're Ashwood. And Ashwood is a problem that won't burn so easily. You assign shifts. Guards at the perimeters, scouts along the trails. You You camouflage the new library structure with branches, ivy, clever angles. You bury backups of every book. Some go in sealed jars in the riverbank, others in caves lined with waxed cloth and salt. Julita builds what she calls memory boxes, bundles of stories tied with string, meant to be scattered like seeds if the worst comes again. You make your peace with impermanence. Because here's the thing about a library, it doesn't need to last forever. It just needs to outlast silence. Let's talk history again. Medieval women, especially those in religious life, were often the uncredited librarians of Europe. They copied texts by hand, wrote glosses in margins, preserved languages that would have been lost to fire or apathy, but the libraries rarely bore their names. They were anonymous hands in a male legacy. Until, of course, a few refused. Some signed their work, others added poems. One, in a convent in Germany, scrawled her name beside a theological argument and wrote, "I have read and I have lived." Fringe fact? In a lesser-known codex from 1472, found in the ashes of a burned-out scriptorium, there's a page labelled Songs for Her. The music is written in red ink, the lyrics in a dialect that blends Latin with an obscure form of early Dutch. One verse translates loosely to, "Her voice is enough to resurrect the world." Back at Ashwood, that becomes your motto. You carve it into the threshold of the new library with your own knife. You make Clara sing it every time a new book arrives. Adelicia rolls her eyes. "We're not a cult." Clara smirks. "We're worse. We're educated." More girls arrive every week now, some sent by word of mouth, others by symbols scratched into trees. The violet mark has spread far beyond what you intended. It's scratched into stable walls, carved into tavern beams, sewn into shawls. It's a language of hope, and you didn't mean to invent it, but you will protect it. One day, a man shows up at the edge of the woods, alone, hands raised, no weapons. He wears priest's robes, but not the kind you've learned to fear. They're old, frayed. He looks tired, weather-beaten, like someone who once believed in a god he could see and now just hopes for one who listens. He doesn't speak at first, just stands at the threshold of Ashwood, staring like he's looking at a myth made flesh. Finally he says, "I read your chronicle." You say, "Good. Then you know why you can't stay." He nods, leaves a leather pouch on the ground, turns and walks away. Inside, 4 gold coins and a scrap of parchment. It reads, "I was wrong. May you write louder than I ever preached." That night you host a reading circle under the stars. Clara reads from the new arrivals. Julita passes around dried plums. Mouse draws pictures of each reader in charcoal. And you, for once, don't feel responsible for all of it. You just listen. Because that's the open scholarly debate for this chapter. Who gets to decide what counts as history? Is it the one who writes the story or the one who lives it? Is it the monk with the ink-stained fingers? Or the girl with scars on her palms and poems in her blood? Some say history is written by the victors, but you've come to believe it's written by the survivors. And you are, defiantly, one of them. Ashwood doesn't sleep that night. It hums, and the library, just a table, just a few books, just a brick-legged monument to refusal, it stands, still. The day the first student arrives, you don't know she's a student. She's just a girl at the edge of the tree line, small and hunched beneath a bundle of cloth that looks heavier than she is, dirt on her cheeks, blood on her ankle, and a look in her eyes like she's had to kill parts of herself just to stay alive. Nothing you haven't seen before, but something about the way she stares at the buildings of Ashwood, the rough-hewn library and the barely standing hall, like they're made of fire and gospel, stops you mid-step. You approach slowly, offer her water. She takes it. Her hands shake as she drinks. "What's your name?" you ask. She doesn't answer right away. Then, "Does it have to be my real one?" You smile. "No, it just has to be yours." She nods. "Then call me Mira." You don't ask where she came from. You recognise the way she avoids saying. There are bruises on her arms, scars too fresh to be weather-borne. Her shoes are wrong for travel, soft, delicate, convent-issued. You help her inside. She doesn't stop clutching her bundle. That night, she sits beside the fire, wrapped in 3 cloaks, watching the others laugh and pass bread and read poetry aloud like they were allowed to. You think she might cry, but she doesn't. She just stares like someone relearning what air is. Later, when everyone's sleeping, she pulls you aside and unrolls the bundle. It's a book, a single book, ragged, water-damaged. Pages missing, but it's handwritten. in a woman's script. Margins full of drawings, of plants, of stars, of a woman holding another's hand. Mira whispers, "She was my sister. They burned her for it." And then she says the words that make you press a hand to your mouth. She told me if anything happened to her, I should come find Ashwood. You don't know whether to laugh or collapse. It's working. It's actually working. You've crossed the border between myth and map. Girls aren't just stumbling in anymore. They're seeking you out. So you do something you've never done before. You start a class, no robes, no chalk, just a circle of girls under the sun with paper and ink and enough blunt honesty to change the world. You begin with names, not the saint ones, not the convent ones, the real ones, the chosen ones. Everyone says their name aloud, even Mira. Then you ask them, "What do you want to know?" Hands fly up. "How do I tell if I've been lied to?" What does consent actually mean? Why does Latin get to decide what's holy? You smile. The curriculum writes itself. Here's a historical anchor for your last night with me. In scattered pockets of Europe during the later Middle Ages, informal women-led schools did exist. Not just for nobility, not just in secret, but in ways that defied category. Some were run by healers, some by reformed nuns, others by women who had simply had enough. They taught literacy, medicine, history from a perspective that rarely made it into parchment. They passed down skills and stories that the church considered non-essential, which, of course, meant dangerous fringe fact. A girl's primer found buried beneath an orchard in Burgundy had pages teaching both Latin and herbal contraception. One margin read, "This is not for his sake, it is for yours." Back at Ashwood, Mira becomes the first to copy an entire book by hand. It's not perfect, the ink runs, the lines waver, but she binds it herself using thread made from her own old veil. Clara cries when she sees it. You add it to the library, give it a shelf all its own, and above the shelf you hang a sign burned into wood. The first student, not the last. Because they're coming now. In ones, in pairs, sometimes in small scared groups, girls who ran, girls who crawled, girls who clawed their way out of graves someone else dug for them. They bring stories and pain and questions sharp enough to draw blood. You give them books, you give them shelter, you give them the truth. And some of them, they stay. They ask to help, to teach, to build more. And here's the final scholarly debate, the one scholars still fumble around like they're afraid of it. Was this ever real? Could a movement like this, quiet, female, grassroots, undocumented, actually have happened? Some say no, that it's legend, fiction, the wishful thinking of women who want a history that was kinder to them. Others argue that the very lack of documentation proves its existence. That absence, in this case, is not proof of fiction but of fear, because when women built something the church couldn't control, the first thing it did was erase the evidence. You don't need the debate. You've lived the answer. You've rebuilt Ashwood. Twice now. And if it burns again, you'll rebuild it again because you've taught too many. Because the books are buried deep. Because the map has already spread. Because there are girls right now tracing the violet mark on a doorway and saying, "This way, this is the way." Because you are not a ghost. Because you are not alone. Because this is not the end. Just the end of the beginning. One last note before sleep. Clara finishes the second chronicle just before the leaves begin to turn again. The cover is plain wood, oiled and carved with a sun and a river, and a small house, your home. On the last page she writes, "We were not saints, we were not sinners, we were the ones who stayed when it would have been easier to run. We were the girls who kissed and lived, we were the sisters they tried to burn, we remember each other. And that is holy. So here you are. You made it through the fire, through the frost, through the thick heat of survival that clung to your skin like a second soul. You walked out of the convent with nothing but your name, half forgotten, half stolen. And now you've built something they said could never exist. You broke the silence they depended on. You kissed the wrong people. You learned things they said would damn you. You remembered the names they erased. You wrote them down. You made a library from your scars and a school from your refusal to be holy the way they told you to be. And it mattered. It still does. Ashwood isn't just a place, it never was. It's a rhythm in the blood. A vow whispered between girls who survived. A stone circle hidden in some forest somewhere that still hums at night with the weight of the names. And maybe someday, centuries from now, someone will stumble across a page, torn or half charred, nearly dust, and wonder who you were. Let them all wonder. You've already told the truth. You didn't need to be perfect, you didn't need to be pure, you just needed to be loud enough to echo, and you were. So rest now, you've earned it. You're safe, you're remembered. You're not alone. Now turn off the light. Let the hush settle in your chest like a hymn. Let your breath slow to the pace of old stories, of pages turning in the dark. Whatever tomorrow brings, know this, you are here and you are holy exactly as you are.